They foresaw the future because they knew what their past was. The unfortunate thing is people nowadays forget the past. And you can never see where you're going if you don't understand where you came from. And if you don't get that, no one.
So tell me, out of everything you've ever done, what's the craziest experience you've ever had? That's easy. Earth. Earth? You went to Earth? I did. No way. You were a human? I was. Wow. Are the stories about Earth true? Were they really trapped on Earth? Some were. I know because I was one of the volunteers. Wait a second. You volunteered to go to Earth? I did. I had to. I had family trapped on Earth. But how could you get trapped on Earth? You had to be there to understand. On Earth, you wouldn't remember anything. What do you mean you wouldn't remember anything? I mean, you would have no memory of anything. You wouldn't even remember existing before Earth. What? How is that possible? It was designed that way. It was brilliant. To dive as deeply as possible into such ignorance, such darkness, and still find your way back to remembering who you were. That took true mastery. Wow. I still can't believe you went to Earth. Tell me more. Well, Earth had its own set of laws that everyone agreed to experience. Like gravity, what goes up must come down. Like linear time, day is followed by night. Time? What's time? You know how when we think of something it manifests instantly? Well, on Earth there was a delay. The delay is what made Earth so difficult. Interesting. Time. So tell me more. Before going to Earth, you would choose your family, whether you wanted to be male or female, what race you wanted to be, the location on the planet, things like that. Oh, so you could choose your own character. Exactly. You would enter the Earth as a baby, and be completely dependent on others to teach you the rules. But since nobody could remember the rules, they made up their own rules, based on fear and giving your power away to others. That doesn't sound like much fun. It wasn't for everyone. What did you do while portions of you were on Earth? I watched them. It was pretty funny. What was so funny? Here were these magnificent beings, playing the most unique and cutting-edge experience in the universe, and they were clueless. I tried to guide them as much as possible. Wait a second, you could communicate with them? Yes, but they couldn't hear me. I would show them synchronicities, or send them impulses to help guide them, but they couldn't see the signs. Why not? They didn't trust themselves. So is that why they sent out a call for help? Exactly. Is that when you went? No, I didn't go until later. First volunteers, they had it the worst. What do you mean, had it the worst? Well, they killed them. What? They killed the volunteers. They killed them? Those on Earth couldn't understand what the volunteers were telling them. The idea that they were equal to the volunteers scared them. What were they telling them? Common sense stuff like, all the answers you seek are inside you. Everything I can do, you can do and more. So they killed them? And then they twisted the volunteer's message and created even more fear. What do you mean more fear? Like the message, God is inside you, was turned into, you are separate from God. The message, all the answers you seek are inside you, was twisted into, you can't trust yourself. And they believed it? It was out of control. How could they believe that? You had to be there to understand. Did you know they actually believed that they were the only intelligent life in the universe? Now that's funny. Pretty crazy, I know. So then what happened? The designers knew Earth was going to enter a section of the galaxy that humans had never experienced before. A section filled with a frequency that might be able to reconnect the human's DNA. What was wrong with their DNA? It didn't work anymore. The thing is, their DNA was how they connected with their higher self. So that's why your incarnations couldn't hear you. Exactly. But there was a catch with the new plan. Only those incarnated on Earth could tune in to these new frequencies. Oh, so they needed more volunteers. Yes, but this time they were taking no chances. To pull this off, they needed millions in the physical form, wired and ready to attune to these frequencies. Are these the 21st century humans that all the stories are about? Yep. We volunteered from every corner of the universe to help the humans wake up. What did the volunteers have to do once they got there? We had to wake ourselves up, attune to these frequencies, and spread them to the rest of the planet. That sounds impossible. Most of those watching the Earth experiment didn't think we could pull it off. So, what happened when you got to Earth? Once on Earth, we were taught the same fear-based beliefs that had been handed down for eons. We lived just like everyone else, totally clueless to who we were and what was getting ready to happen. But as soon as the Earth entered this cloud of frequencies, we started to question everything. And one by one, we started to wake up. So the plan was working. It was. The more we trusted ourselves, the quicker we reconnected. And the faster we started to remember what was happening. And since we were spread out evenly all around the planet's frequency began to rise quickly. What happened when the planet's frequency began to rise? The humans' experience of time began speeding up. They started manifesting their beliefs faster and faster. Those consumed with fear created even more fear, and eventually Earth just spun out of control. What do you mean, spun out of control? These low-frequency beliefs that had controlled the human experience for eons could no longer exist. So, they began to self-destruct, and the world fell into complete chaos. That sounds terrifying. It was for those living in fear. But for us volunteers, we all knew it was the end of the old energy and the beginning of the new. So then what happened? A tipping point was reached in our awakening, and we created a new Earth. A new Earth? What happened to the old Earth? It continued on, allowing those who could not let go of their fears to play out their lessons. But for us, we created a new Earth that matched our higher frequency. And as easy as that, all the fear-based beliefs simply fell away. In an instant, we remembered who we were. We knew we were all connected, and we stopped hurting each other. We started respecting each other, started loving each other. We took back our power to create, and we created a new Earth without fear. Wow, so the legends are true. What an incredible experience that must have been. Nice work. Thanks.
We are the misfits. We are the people that are different. We're not the norm. And trying to wonder why all these people around us are not like us is the wrong way to look at it. We're not like normal people.
No one single argument on this planet infuriates me more than the Second Amendment argument. People always say, it says a well-regulated militia. The people that say this need to understand something. The men that wrote that Bill of Rights were way more educated than me or you. Back then, English language was actually something that was valued. I mean, hell, you can even go back to the Civil War and just read letters to home. There definitely aren't the emails and text messages we send today. Those men used what's known as an Oxford comma. An Oxford comma separates two separate thoughts. But let's go ahead and examine the idea of what a militia is. A militia is a group of citizens when the need arises, rise to defend a community or a nation. The Founding Fathers never intended for us to have standing militaries. In fact, they saw it as a sign of tyranny. Federalized military is something they never wanted. That's why they put that. So you and me are the ones that are supposed to be defending this nation. Which means it's your duty as a citizen to defend this nation. If you think regulating or arguing over what those men intended back then is going to change what their intent was today, they foresaw the future because they knew what their past was. The unfortunate thing is people nowadays forget the past. And you can never see where you're going if you don't understand where you came from. If you don't get that, review the section of the FM and land navigation that covers shooting at back azimuth. You gotta know where you've been to know where you're going. And right now, if we take the whole scope of the world and its history, you apparently are forgetting where we've already been. If you think disarming a populace, or even revamping the Bill of Rights is a good idea. Nothing gets better with sequels. They foresaw the future because they knew what their past was. The unfortunate thing is people nowadays forget the past. And you can never see where you're going if you don't understand where you came from. If you don't get that,
And they created school the way the devil had ordered. A child loves nature, yet they locked him up within four walls. A child cannot sit still without moving, yet they forced him to sit still. He loves to work with his hands, yet they started teaching him theories and ideas. He likes to talk, yet they ordered him to keep silent. He strives to understand, yet he was told to memorize. He would like to research and seek out knowledge on his own, yet it was given to him in a ready-made form. And then children learned what they would never have learned under other circumstances. They learned to lie and pretend. That's a quote by the Swiss teacher and publicist Adolf Ferrier. Please weigh in on this. He said this at the beginning of the last century.
It doesn't matter. It's just as accurate today.
Why did they take this free bird, a child, and stuff him into a cage? Why? Please tell me.
It's because of you adults. This is simpler and clearer. To pressure a child by force and make him stay in our four corners. And that's all.
Then what are we taking away from him?
We take away his free development of the soul, heart, mind, and even physical development.
Do you think this is the most important thing in a person?
I think a child should grow up free.
North American, I did some investigation into the derivation of the North American, European, for that matter, public education system, and found out that it was based on the Prussian model. And the Prussians produced a universal education system in the late 1800s because they were afraid they were losing military superiority, and they wanted to produce a cadre of mindless, obedient soldiers. That was expressly the purpose. And then that model was adopted by prototypical fascists in the US, again in the late 1800s. This is before Mussolini and all of that time. Corporate types mostly, who wanted to produce cadres of obedient workers. And that's why the desks are in rows, and that's why there's factory bells, and that's why it's top-down leadership. But what was really stunning about that wasn't only that that was the model, but it's worse than that, because the people who built the schools were consciously aiming at eradicating the will of the students who were part of the system because they wanted them to be obedient. Now, I did some
review
You're not good. You just know how to hide. How to lie. Me, I don't have that part.
The number of veterans in this country, I mean, it's got to be more than 1 million. There are so many people in this country that really understand violence, and they're not the ones calling for violence. They're not the punch a Nazi people. Right. The people that really understand violence, that have seen violence, that have committed violence for their country, those are the motherfuckers that you break glass in case of war. You need them, and people don't understand that. Like these people running around calling for violence, calling for a revolution. Like, you are going to open a door that you can never close. And when those fucking soldiers come pouring out of that door and they want to defend what they think is an attack on their freedoms and their country, you're fucked.
Was talking to Don Lemon. If you didn't stop and say, "Hey, are you okay? Where are you? What's going on with you?" You would be like an asshole. Like that's someone you help.
Yeah.
Not someone you like put into a fucking job that melts people half your age down. And like all the shit aside,
Melts people.
Yeah.
Melts people.
Where's the fucking compassion
It's
for this
crazy.
old man who needs to be like enjoying the last years of his?
He's this book. I'm having this discussion while I'm wearing wolf teeth.
I didn't realize that I am too. Ow.
I'm having this discussion while I'm wearing wolf teeth.
I didn't realize that I am too. Ow, fuck.
But what are their options? That's the problem. What are their options? They have a vice president that seems like she's not the best at it. And then who is on the horizon? Like who's going to take that spot? Who's going to take that leadership position?
Dude.
Who's there that makes sense?
The option is just start telling the truth. Like the
Right,
moment.
but that's not going to happen with them. So that spot, who's going to take that leadership position?
Dude.
Who's there that makes sense?
The option is just start telling the truth. Like the
Right,
moment.
but that's not going to happen with them. So
Right.
what they want to do is win, and they want to stay in power, and they can even justify that by saying that we are going to do the overall good. We have like great
Right.
ideas about social justice. We have great ideas about reshaping the
Yeah.
economy and making things more fair, and you know, they've got some good points. It's not like the liberals don't have things that I agree with. I agree with most of what they say.
Sure.
Most of the idea, like the civil ideas.
Like what?
Most of the things about equality, most of the things about like the idea that there's like real income inequality in this country. It's real, and it's kind of creepy.
Right.
And there's a source, and the source is opportunity. And if we don't create opportunity for these people that live in these horrible places, then we don't give a fuck about them. And then if we wonder why there's so much crime, we wonder why there's so much violence. And then you have to wonder, is there an industry that's based around making sure that people stay criminals?
Right.
Well, there is. It's the prison industrial complex. It's a real thing.
Right.
They need prisoners. And then you find out that prison guards unions lobbied to keep marijuana illegal.
Right.
You're like, what? Because they want more people in their prison.
Yeah.
They want to lock people up so they can make money.
Right.
It's crazy.
Vampirism.
So the liberals are right on a lot of these. I just think they're wrong in the approach. I think the approach is not to just exonerate people and let people out of jail and let fucking chaos ensue and defund the police. I think the approach is to start dumping money into these cities. Start figuring out how to set up community centers. Start figuring out how to get people healthy food. Start figuring out how to protect people from gang violence. In fact, maybe have more police so that the police can prevent people from getting shot and killed so they feel safe in their community. But you have to get better police. So you need more money for training, more money for funding, more money for salary, and make them feel like a respected, appreciated part of the community, and then have oversight over them. And make sure that the people that have oversight over them are good people. Good people exist.
Yeah.
They're out there. We're mostly good. Human beings, I think, are mostly good.
Fundamentally good.
Fundamentally good.
But we get covered up by defense mechanisms. That's the problem. That fundamental goodness is covered up and warped by defense mechanisms and confused motivations. I mean, fuck. That's the saddest part. Is it's like when you say they want to win.
Yeah.
Their idea of winning isn't even winning. It's just holding power. That's not winning.
But that's winning. They think it's winning, and that's what human beings do. We naturally play this game of winner and loser with almost everything. That's why neighborhoods, like people try to keep, that's the expression, keeping up with the Joneses. They're trying to win. You know, like, hey, Mike got a Corvette. Fuck him.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to get a Ferrari.
Yeah.
Ooh, Mike, how do you like my Ferrari, you piece of shit?
Right.
You know, it's like classic comedy sitcom tropes.
Right. Yeah, that to me is like, you're right. I think you're right.
People want to win, man.
People want to win, and there's
That's why it's dangerous to have cops pull people over. You know, there's something about that too. Like, you definitely should pull people over because they're bad, but cops want to write tickets. They want to catch people. They want to bust people. They're supposed to bust people.
It's the profit motive is fucking everything up. But it's like also what is creating some of the coolest shit ever.
Yes.
That's the problem. Like, it's a double-edged sword. On one side, competition creates insane innovation based on market pressure. It's incredible. On the other side of it, you get people who shouldn't be millionaires. You get people who somehow have overcome their desire to have the next Ferrari and realize, oh, the better thing to do is help. Like, I just want to help. The idea was it's a public servant, not someone who's like manipulating the fucking stock market or selling their shit. That's the problem, man. It's really insidious. And it's like, on one side, it's like, all right, so if we regulate it, well, now you've got like the hardcore socialism starts happening. Now you've got redistribution of wealth. Now you're trying to like reset the game in the middle of the game. And lots of people are like, no, fuck that. We're not resetting the game, right? But then on the other side, if you don't do anything about it, then the game like takes over everything. It's like the government is now no longer a representative government at all. At all. It's just a weird bag of greedy miscreants who are all getting various checks from various, sometimes competitive industries and making laws based on that. And that's not a government. I don't know what that is. That's a casino or something. That's just people who got to the high roller table. No, it's like people who are like, I'm done gambling. I'm going to control the fucking casino.
Well, that's what people are terrified about with generational wealth. That's why people are terrified of like very, very wealthy families that transfer this money down to their children. Like, and the children don't earn it. Like that's the king. That's Joffrey.
Right. Yeah.
You know, everybody knows what that is. That's why Succession is such a good show, because you can relate to it. Right. Like, like what fucking bizarre reality do they exist in?
Dude, I don't know, but I wish I'd experienced it. That looks fucking fun, baby. Oh my God, can you imagine bursting out of that womb into some Illuminati fucking delivery chamber?
Guns blazing.
Holy shit, it's the best. Oh my God, what a life.
Private jets from birth.
Oh, fucking
Diamonds.
Incredible. Access to
Rolexes.
the adrenochrome chambers.
Adrenochrome on the left.
On the left, just
Just use your irises. They'll let you right in.
Dude, I can't even. That is just so crazy to imagine what that's like.
What is that like?
You never know. You never know what it's like to like worry about being able to like, you know, have you ever like gone out to eat with people and you have to run your credit card? And you're like, please God, let it go through. How overdrawn is it? You know what I mean? Like those moments of like, I'm about to get humiliated in front of my friends. You've never known that. You've only known endless, infinite opulence. Your nannies have fucking nannies. You've got like, you're being educated by like some of the smartest people on the planet. Your diapers cost as much as like most people's like wardrobe for the year. You know,
in
like
the world, for sure.
Yeah, that's a really cool incarnation, man.
Strange. Because it doesn't give you the adversity that you need as a young person. It doesn't give you the challenges to overcome. It doesn't give you the real possibility that you could be broke someday. The real possibility that you might not have enough food. I think there's a superpower in growing up poor. I really do. It never escapes me. Never. Growing up poor, when I was a young boy and we were drinking like powdered milk and living off welfare, food stamps.
Wow.
I remember that. I remember that clearly. I remember shame.
Right.
I remember all of it.
Yeah.
And so, also, I saw my parents build out of that and then move to a respectable middle-class suburb so that we could go to a good high school.
Right.
So I saw what hard work and all the thinking that was involved in planning this out properly led to get out of that.
Yeah.
But we were in San Francisco in the 1970s, and it was fucking weird. I felt very vulnerable already, but then on top of that, to be poor, and then on top of that, to be a latchkey kid. So I was just like out wandering. I could just like leave and go anywhere.
Right. Yeah, man. That formed you.
Yeah, that forms you. And if you grow up on private jets, and if you grow up always knowing that you're going to have money, always knowing that you're going to be fine, always knowing that you're going to be a part of an empire at one point that has wealth, the likes of which no one will ever be able to explain. Where your children will be billionaires. You can divide it evenly amongst their children. They'll be billionaires as well. It's nuts.
It's like a different universe.
But those kind of people that grow up in that environment will never think like you do. They won't. They'll never think like I do. They won't. There's like extra gears that you have that you're born with when you live in poverty. I think that's like, you look at all the great athletes, almost all of them, unless they grew up in households that were like very strong households where the father really encouraged athletics and was like really a great coach, and the kid like grew up competing and really enjoyed it. That's possible too. But in fighting in particular, boy, it's a lot of people from fucking dire poverty. It's a lot of people.
But don't you think it's possible as a parent? Because like, I mean, my kids aren't scraping by, and I know your kids aren't. Isn't it possible as a parent, if you're lucky enough to not have to worry about that shit our parents worried about?
Yes.
To still create a childhood and a life that isn't imbalanced and has within it the possibility for failure and having to like figure out how to do shit.
Yes,
Right?
100%. It's possible. It's just a different challenge, right? Like in life presenting you with challenges that you could have never predicted, you didn't ask for, and they're right in front of you and you have to deal with them. People that go through that sort of a life, I think they have like way more defenses up, way more awareness of deception, way more awareness of people's ulterior motives and people who are creepy, people who aren't being genuine. And you and I have both encountered plenty of people like that.
Yeah, sure.
Where you'll pull me aside and go, hey man, I don't think this guy's cool. Like there's something wrong with this guy.
Yes.
Yeah. And you know, I'm not going to get that necessarily from everybody. Some people are not going to see that.
Right.
They're not going to have been in dangerous situations where they had to like realize the consequences of not recognizing these kind of people early.
Yeah, right, sure.
Yeah.
So you were, I mean, this is it sucks because it's like, what do you get? You get an inflamed fucking amygdala is what you get. You get like, your fucking brain just loves to spray out cortisol. And so like, that's what you get because you came up with that. You watched your fucking parents freak the fuck out for potentially your entire childhood. And so, yeah, you're freaked out. You're living in like a weird battlefield that doesn't even exist anymore that was your childhood. Whereas like, some people, they didn't have that. So they're, you know, they don't think about shit like that. They don't think about like, oh my God, is this person okay? Or, oh my God, they don't have that we have. I think it's, dude, honestly, man, I don't know. I do agree with you that adversity has to be in a human life. That if you remove adversity from a life, you do an incredible disservice to
the potential of that life.
To the potential of that life.
Yeah.
Because it's just physics.
But it can be in anything. It could be in disciplines. It could be in games they play. It could be in sports. It can be in a lot of things. But they have to do things. Like, you gotta do shit.
You have to confront the learning curve.
Yeah, so you gotta learn how to get better at stuff, and then you gotta be excited about that feeling that you get when you get better at stuff.
Yes.
That's giant. That's a giant part of
it. Dude, that's it. And you start connecting with that feeling as being actual success.
Yeah.
That's actual success. Not, like, whatever else the world gives you is fantastic, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But if you never had that feeling in a lifetime, and you were, like, sleeping on bags of fucking cash, it wouldn't mean anything.
It wouldn't mean anything. But that's the weirdness of winning the lottery, right? That's the weirdness of all of a sudden becoming a part of this like hyper wealthy elite, and that's the weirdness of anybody's life in North America. Like if you're in North America, first of all you hit the fucking lottery, right? If you're in the United States, oh shit, you don't even have to get vaccinated. If you're in Canada used to be an awesome spot to live until the lockdowns. Then it was like, what is happening up there?
Yeah, what is happening up there?
What's going on?
It's like of all the places you would expect to have some like encroaching fascism happening.
Never
Canada. Never on my list of. It's very odd.
Like they're doing it under the guise of social justice, and it's so creepy.
But that is how you do like if you want to do fascism, that's how you do it. Like you don't do fascism by saying like, hey, I'm going to control the shit out of you motherfuckers. You do it by saying, hey, you better watch out because this thing is coming, and I'm the only one who can keep you from that thing coming. Fill in whatever that thing is.
Bro, when they lock people out of their bank accounts for protesting, when they had the Freedom Convoy, they locked people out of their bank accounts. Dude. They locked people out of their bank accounts that donated. Not even that went there, that donated. You can't agree with them. You can't agree with them. We're going to take your money.
So spooky.
That's crazy.
So spooky.
That's so scary because it sends ripples of fear through everybody. And it should. It should. Just because you think you're doing it for the right reasons, there's a reason why we are so protective of the Bill of Rights. We're so protective of the Constitution. If you don't have something like that where it's written down, they just keep pushing the rules.
Yes.
They keep changing. They're making all these crazy new woke rules in Canada. You can't say shit about it. There's censorship of everything on the internet that they don't like. They can pull things down. They can do all kinds of wild shit. I don't know about the internet. What is it? I know it's about broadcasting. I know there's like they've passed some new censorship legislation. I don't think it's the internet. I'm exaggerating. But
it's not
I want to do a quick shout out.
It is what it is.
To the people who have been awake for a very long time. I've been awake since January of 2020. That's when I woke up to the truth. I can't imagine what it's been like for people who have known for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and more. I'm so sorry. I bet it was extremely lonely and hard to watch. I hope you find peace, or I hope that you have found peace. Thank you for all that you've done. Coming to the tree, they strung up a man. They said you were free. Strange things that happen to you, stranger would it be? We met and lived right in the hanging tree. Or you, come into the tree. Death and hope have always held you free. Are you?
Today that if you at all question your government story, you're a conspiracy theorist, which means you believe in anything, you're out in left field and all this stuff, and green men are coming from Mars and everything like that, which I think is highly unfair. So in light of that book, which was a bestseller, and by the way, I might add, Conspiracy Theory spent 7 weeks on the New York Times top 10 best-selling list, and yet was not reviewed by one mainstream media in the United States of America, including the Times itself, that it was on their list top 10 for 7 weeks. Why? Why, if not just to say the book's a piece of crap in the end? Why was it ignored? You know, a book like that. So Dick Russell, my co-writer, and I, we decided, well, let's take a different approach with this next book. Let's do a book that they can't put any blame on us for theories or what I might think. And so we chose, and this was before WikiLeaks. We started this project 3 months before WikiLeaks even happened. And we said, let's do government documents. That way, the government documents speak for themselves and they're real. They exist. So this book has nothing to do with any type of theory, conspiracy theory. Every document is in this book is reproduced. We wanted to do that to where I just don't tell you about the documents and give you my opinion, which I do. But the documents are all reproduced in full, so you yourself can read them and judge for yourself what the document says. And we tried to go basically through my lifetime, and I will be 60 this summer, so we go back that far, and we progress forward to the modern time, and we hit documents all the way along the way. All the documents are legal. We didn't break any laws. They're out there. We didn't break anything top secret or that hadn't been unclassified. They're all in the public domain. And I will tell you this book to me is terrifying. This book was not easy to write. I'm a 6-year Navy veteran. I love my country. I have the rare privilege, my brother is a Vietnam veteran, I am a Vietnam veteran, and I have the rare privilege that not too many people can say, my father was a World War II veteran and so was my mother. Not many people can say their mom was a World War II veteran. My father, today that if you put
On December 23, 1783, George Washington resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. For the next 3 years, he led a quiet life of farming at Mount Vernon. However, in the fall of 1786, he began to receive alarming reports of revolution coming from Massachusetts. Newspapers were reporting that a mob of some 4,000 indebted farmers had organized themselves into an army and were shutting down courts throughout Massachusetts. It was suggested that the government of Massachusetts itself was in danger of being overthrown by the radicals.
Shutting down courts. That's what's important. You gotta figure out why they wanted to shut down the court.
Adding to Washington's concerns was a letter about the situation written to him by friend and former artillery chief Henry Knox. In October, Knox wrote, "The numbers of these people may amount in Massachusetts to 1/5 part of several populous counties, and to them may be added the people of similar sentiments from the states of Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Hampshire, so as to constitute a body of 12 or 15,000. In a word, they are determined to annihilate all debts, public and private, and have agrarian laws. Something must be done, or we shall be involved in all the horror of faction and civil war without a prospect of its termination." Knox paints a picture of the rebellion as a large interstate insurrection of farmers looking to get their debts extinguished. He suggests the rebellion may even end in civil war. David Humphreys, a former Washington aide who lived in New Haven, seems to confirm Knox's report. He writes, "The troubles in Massachusetts still continue. Government is prostrated in the dust, and it is much to be feared that there is not energy enough in that state to re-establish the civil powers. There is a licentious spirit prevailing among the people, a leveling principle, a desire of change, and wish to annihilate all debts, public and private." Washington relied heavily on the reports from Knox and Humphreys and was clearly agitated. Was the nation he sacrificed 8 years to help form about to dissolve into one of anarchy and revolution? In November, he wrote a letter to General Benjamin Lincoln in Massachusetts, in which he lamented, "Are your people getting mad? Are we to have the goodly fabric that 8 years were spent in rearing pulled over our heads? What is the cause of all these commotions? When and how is it to end?" For all intents and purposes, the rebellion will end in February 1787. However, Washington wanted to know the cause of the rebellion. Knox and Humphreys offered one. It had been the standard one for years. Was it the correct one, though? Let's take a look at what happened in western Massachusetts in the fall and winter of 1786 to 87, and discover how these events may have been used as a catalyst for one of the most important events in American history. In 1786, most of western Massachusetts consisted of small family-owned farms. Since the soil in this area was generally rocky, it was difficult for many farmers to eke out a living. A depressed economy coupled with rising taxes caused most farms to be barely self-sustaining. To add to the farmers' hardship, Massachusetts required taxes to be paid in hard money, silver or gold. No paper money was accepted for payment. Since silver and gold were in short supply, this became extremely difficult. Additionally, many farmers had taken on debt to keep their farms afloat. Now, many holders of that debt also demanded payment in hard money. Farmers who previously paid their debt in paper money, produce, or labor now found themselves in severe financial trouble. In the years from 1780 to 1784, though times were difficult for the farmers, the governor in office was generally sympathetic to their plight. Governor John Hancock, understanding that many farmers were former soldiers who had suffered economically during the war, was less than vigorous in enforcing the tax laws. However, in January 1785, after Hancock left office, the situation turned dramatically worse for the farmers. When their debts could not be paid, they were often hauled into court. From 1784 to 1786, in the farming community of Hampshire County, Massachusetts, 31.4% of the county's men over 16 were taken to court. The numbers were similar in Worcester, Essex, Bristol, and Berkshire counties. Some lost their lands. Berkshire County Judge William Whiting noted, "Great numbers of farmers have been constantly stripped of whatever little stocks they possessed, and those often sold at auction for a mere trifling. Others were thrown into jail. In Hampshire County from July 1784 to December 1786, the average 2-month period saw 73 men sent to jail for relatively small debts." These numbers were similar in other counties. Historian David Satmary quotes a Massachusetts farmer who summed up the situation of many. "Our taxes are so high, together with calls of a private nature, that our stock and cattle are greatly diminished. The greater part, then, of those who gloriously supported our independence now find their movables vanishing like empty shades, their lands sinking under their feet." Many of these men were former Revolutionary War soldiers who now found themselves living in a country very different from the one they had envisioned at the war's end.
You know, most of the time when we hear about taxes, we hear about Democrats raise taxes, Republicans lower taxes. But when you study the history of taxes in the U.S., there's going to be many things today we're going to say, you got to be kidding me, Pat. Who came up with the IRS? You're going to be blown away by who came up with the IRS. The whole idea of holding your taxes when you get paid in your payroll, who came up with that idea? Which president raised the national debt the most? Which president raised it percentage and dollar amount? Then we're going to talk about the correlation between war and taxes and why does the U.S. have so many military bases around the world compared to Russia, China, France. All of that stuff we're covering in today's episode. All right, so stick around till the very end because I want to have my final thoughts in a PDF for you. But let's get right into it. 1754 to 1763. During that time, the French-Indian War took place, which the Brits started taxing the colonists. And the colonists said, wait a minute, why are you raising taxes without asking us? How come we don't have any kind of representation? That led to taxation without representation. American Revolution began, and the founders wanted lower taxes and representation, which led to 1775 to 1783, the American Revolutionary War. By the time it was done, obviously, U.S. became a country, and U.S. had two forms of taxes, tariffs and excise taxes. So that led to the Tariff Act of 1789, which was a 50-cent tax on foreign ships per ton, and it was 6-cent tax on American-owned vessels per ton. Okay, so that's 1789. Then we go to 1790.
Let me just point out something else you might not know.
In late November, word had already gotten off of the mainland that there was a virus in Wuhan. 6 weeks later, the trade truce was signed with an out clause, a very clever out clause, that said if there was any kind of act of God, pandemic, then they didn't have to make good on what they had committed to buy from the United States. Within days, they announced the first coronavirus. The World Health Organization should be held accountable for not holding China accountable to providing. In late November, word had already gotten off of the mainland that there was a virus in Wuhan. 6 weeks later, the trade truce was signed with an out clause. In late November, word had already gotten off of the mainland that there was a virus in Wuhan. 6 weeks later, the trade...
Signed.
Vessels per ton. Okay, so that's 1789. Then we go to 1792 to 1802, which was the French Revolutionary War, and this introduced us to property taxes. And then in 1812 to 1815, it was the War of 1812. U.S. declared war against the Brits because the negotiation was going nowhere, so Madison wasn't happy about it. And by the way, the whole story about Star Spangled Banner comes from the War of 1812.
So let's see what that says. Let's try to listen closely to what's being said and actually hear the words.
There was a lawyer once. His name was Francis Scott Key.
There was a lawyer.
He penned a song that I'm sure you're aware of. You've seen it. It's in most hymnals throughout our churches. It's called the National Anthem. It is our song as an American. We go, however, to a ball game. We stand in our church services and we sing the words of that song, and they float over our minds and our lips, and we don't even realize what we're singing. Most of us have memorized it as a child, but we've never really thought about what it means. Let me tell you a story. Francis Scott Key was a lawyer in Baltimore. The colonies were engaged in vicious conflict with the mother country, Britain. Because of this
the mother country, Britain.
conflict and the protractedness of it, they had accumulated prisoners on both sides. The American colonies had prisoners and the British had prisoners. And the American government initiated a move. They went to the British and they said, let us negotiate for the release of these prisoners. They said, we want to send a man out to discuss this with you. They were holding the American prisoners in boats about 1,000 yards offshore. And they said, we want to send a man by the name of Francis Scott Key. He will come out and negotiate to see if we can make a mutual exchange. On the appointed day, in a rowboat, he went out to this boat and he negotiated with the British officials. And they reached a conclusion that men could be exchanged on a one-for-one basis. Francis Scott Key, jubilant with the fact that he'd been successful, went down below in the boats, and what he found was a cargo hold full of humanity, men. And he said, men, I've got news for you tonight. You're free. He said, tonight I have negotiated successfully your return to the colonies. He said, you'll be taken out of this boat, out of this filth, out of your chains. As he went back up on board to arrange for their passage to the shore, the admiral came and he said, we have a slight problem. He said, we will still honor our commitment to release these men, but it'll be merely academic after tonight. It won't matter. And Francis Scott Key said, what do you mean? He said, well, Mr. Key, he said, tonight we have laid an ultimatum upon the colonies. Your people will either capitulate and lay down the colors of that flag that you think so much of, or you see that fort right over there, Fort Henry? He said, we're going to remove it from the face of the earth. He said, how are you going to do that? He said, if you will, scan the horizon of the sea. And as he looked, he could see hundreds of little dots. And he said, that's the entire British war fleet. He said, all of the gunpowder, all of the armament is being called upon to demolish that fort. It will be here within striking distance in a matter of about 2.5 hours. He said, the war is over. These men would be free anyway.
The war is over. These men would be free anyway. So if the war is already over, what happened?
He said, you can't shell that fort. He said, that's a large fort. He said, it's full of women and children. He says, it's predominantly not a military fort.
It's not a military fort. And it's women and children. And the war is over.
They said, don't worry about it. They said, we've left them a way out. And he said, what's that? He said, do you see that flag way up on the rampart? He said, we have told them that if they will lower that flag, the shelling will stop immediately. And we'll know that they've surrendered, and you'll now be under British rule. Francis Scott Key went down below and told the men what was about to happen.
But the war was already over. Did you forget that part? That is why you were under British rule. And how is that? Look at the Northeast. Everything. New England. New Canaan. New London. Hartford. Greenwich. New Britain. You get it yet?
How many ships? He said hundreds. The ships got closer. Francis Scott Key went back up on top and he said, "Men, I'll shout down to you what's going on as we watch." As twilight began to fall, and as the haze hung over the ocean as it does at sunset, suddenly the British war fleet unleashed. He says the sound was deafening. There were so many guns that there were no reliefs. He said it was absolutely impossible to talk or hear. He said suddenly the sky, although dark, was suddenly lit. And he says from down below, all he could hear the men, the prisoners, saying was, "Tell us where the flag is. What have they done with the flag? Is the flag still flying over the rampart? Tell us." 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours into the shelling, every time the bomb would explode and it would be close to the flag, they could see the flag in the illuminated red glare of that bomb, and Francis Scott Key would report down to the men below, "It's still up. It's not down." The admiral came and he said, "Your people are insane." He said, "What's the matter with them?" He said, "Don't they understand this is an impossible situation?" Francis Scott Key said he remembered what George Washington had said. He said, "The thing that sets the American Christian apart from all other people in the world is he will die on his feet before he'll live on his knees." The admiral said, "We have now instructed all of the guns to focus on the rampart to take that flag down." He said, "We don't understand something. Our reconnaissance tells us that that flag has been hit directly again and again and again, and yet it's still flying. We don't understand that." But he said, "Now we're about to bring every gun for the next 3 hours to bear on that point." Francis Scott Key said the barrage was unmerciful. All that he could hear was the men down below praying. The prayer, "God, keep that flag flying where we last saw it." Sunrise came. He said there was a heavy mist hanging over the land, but the rampart was tall enough. There stood the flag, completely nondescript, in shreds. The flagpole itself was at a crazy angle, but the flag was still at the top. Francis Scott Key went aboard and immediately went into Fort Henry to see what had happened. And what he found had happened was that that flagpole and that flag had suffered repetitious direct hits. And when hit had fallen, but men, fathers, who knew what it meant for that flag to be on the ground, although knowing that all of the British guns were trained on it, walked over and held it up humanly until they died. Their bodies were removed and others took their place.
Their bodies were removed and others took their place for a flag. And everybody agrees with it. Imagine that. Your family grows up without a father or a mother. For a flag. For a war that politicians play theater for you to fall victim to, as they line their pockets and make their rules for you to obey. Think about it. When you have a job and you work for your boss, the boss makes the rules and he pays you. But you think the politician that you gave your power to, that you voted for, works for you, yet somehow you're paying him and he's making your rules. You didn't make the rules. He did, and you're paying him. Imagine walking into work tomorrow and saying to your boss, I make the rules around here, and you pay me. Imagine doing that. Interesting, isn't it?
Francis Scott Key said what held that flagpole in place at that unusual angle were patriots' bodies. He penned the song, "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming. Or the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that the flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet fly and wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? The debt was demanded. The price, it was paid. Oh, say.
The debt was demanded.
Comes from the War of 1812. So now it's when the juicy stuff begins. So in 1861 to 1865, Civil War breaks out in America, right? It wasn't pretty, it was ugly, very expensive. That's when in 1862, a president known as one of the greatest presidents of all time, if not the greatest president of all time, Lincoln, came up with the Revenue Act of 1862, which lasted for 10 years. And in 1862 was the first ever progressive tax, 3% on income earners between $600 to $10,000 a year, 5% on those making $10,000 or more. Only about 10% of Americans pay taxes. Abraham Lincoln, known as one of the greatest presidents of all time, I have him in one of my paintings in my office on July 1st, 1862. You know what he started? You know what he introduced to us? An organization you may have heard of before called the IRS. Yes, the IRS was started under Lincoln in 1862 with the idea of having the tax withholding system, which means you make $1,000 in a month. They wanted the employer to withhold the taxes to pay to the government. Why? Because Lincoln said, folks, we just had the Civil War. Very costly, very expensive. We got to pay this off. We need you to agree to pay some federal income taxes. But when we pay it off, we're going to get away with this. So guess what happened? Started in 1862. Do you think the federal income tax ever went away? It did. 10 years later, 1872, they said, we paid off the war. Guess what? No more taxes. They went away with taxes and went back to what it used to be before. In 1894, Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company, 1895, Congress tried to impose a 2% tax on earnings in excess of $4,000. In 1894, tax was challenged in court by a Massachusetts resident named Charles Pollock. The Supreme Court ruled in his favor, striking down the tax because you cannot go out there and tax anybody for no reason. But the Socialist Union Party, the Populist Party, and the Democratic Party sat there and says, we got to figure something out to be able to tax people. What is this all about? So in 1913, we came out with the 16th Amendment, and here's how it reads. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without appointment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. So that's how the first permanent income was levied in 1913, influenced by the Socialist Labor Party, the Populist Party, and the Democratic Party. It was 1% for those earning between $0 to $20,000, 2% for those 20 to 50, 3% for 50 to 75, 4% for 75 to 100, 5% for 100 to 250, 6% for 250 to half a mil, and then 7% for 500,000 plus. So keep this in mind. So far we have the French and Indian War, we have the American Revolutionary War, we have the French Revolutionary War, we have the War of 1812, we have the Civil War, and then that leads to World War I, 1914 to 1918, which U.S. got involved April 2nd, 1917. Why does this matter? Because if you go back and look at the taxes, in 1916, the top line taxes was 15%. The moment we got involved in 1917, taxes went up to 67%. So that was another reason why taxes went up. Again, war. So then that goes to 1929 to 1933. Great Depression takes place. FDR's the president. And in 1933, FDR's New Deal is being launched, and there's two plans to it. Part one of the deal included the Banking Act of 1933 and the Securities Act of 1933. And part two of it was in 1935, which introduced Social Security, minimum wage, Fair Labor Standard Act, and by 1936, the top tax rate hit 79%, and the economy's output plummeted. What we still haven't covered is World War II from 1939 to 1945, which the U.S. got involved on December 7th, 1941. So combine the Great Depression and World War II led to, in 1945, when FDR died, the top marginal tax rate hit 94%. From 1940 to 1963, the top marginal tax rate hovered between 81 to 91%. That's for 24 years, 81 to 91%. By the way, just some fun facts for you. In 1939, 4 million Americans filed taxes. They raised $900 million of tax revenue. By 1943, 41 million people filed taxes for $13 billion of tax revenue. And 2 years later, 43 million people filed taxes, and the government's revenue went to $45 billion. So remember how in 1862, Lincoln comes out with the IRS and says, listen, we need to raise money, we need to raise taxes because of Civil War was so expensive that it led to them coming up with the tax withholding system, which means the employer is about to pay the employee $1,000, let's just say. They withhold the taxes and they send to the government. Remember that? And then it went away because Lincoln said, when we pay off this debt, this income tax will go away. And in 1872, it went away. Well, let's come to 1943. The war is still going on, World War II. The party, the socialists, the liberals, the Democrats, went to get help from a guy named Milton Friedman, where in 1943, he helped the tax withholding system become official, where they can start taking taxes out of your income with the employer sending the money to the government. Essentially, the employer became the tax collector, not the government. And here's what Milton Friedman had to say about this later on in life. This would have been introduced had I been involved or not. At the time, we concentrated single-mindedly on promoting the war effort. We gave next to no consideration to any longer-term consequences. It never occurred to me that at the time I was helping to develop machinery that would make possible a government that I would come to criticize severely as too large, too intrusive, too destructive of freedom. Yet that was precisely what I was doing. Quote, Milton Friedman. So you may be saying, Pat, what's the big deal about this? Who cares? Leave him alone. You even got Milton Friedman in your painting. Why are you making such a big deal about this? Here's why. Because when Lincoln did it, he said, when we pay off all the cost that we paid for the war, Civil War, we will stop income taxes. However, in 1913, when Wilson introduced this, saying when we pay off the bill for World War I, when FDR said, when we pay off the bill for World War II, we will stop taking income taxes, it never went away. It became permanent. And then the tax withholding system, check, made it very permanent. FYI, you know how old this is? 78 years old. That's it. The whole tax withholding thing with your income when you get your W-2, when you get somebody takes all the taxes out, it's only 78 years old. Why? Because no one said anything about it, and it's now been around for this many years. So here's what's crazy about it. This entire time, Democrats keep raising taxes. You got Wilson, you got, FDR here, taxes raised 94%, 81%, all this stuff being raised. And then JFK shows up and says, what are we doing? Why do we keep doing this? Why do we keep raising taxes? It is time to lower taxes. And he gives this legendary speech in August of 1962, and here's what he had to say. A creative tax cut, creating more jobs, income, and eventually more revenue. And the right time for that kind of bill now appears in the absence of an economic crisis today, and if the job is to be done in a responsible way, is January 1963. Such a bill will be presented to the Congress for action next year. It will include an across-the-board, top-to-bottom, cut in both corporate and personal income taxes. It will include long-needed tax reforms that logic and equity demand. And it will date that cutting taxes to take effect as of the start of next year, January 1963. The billions of dollars this bill will place in the hands of the consumer and our businessmen will both have immediate and permanent benefits to our economy. Every dollar released from taxation that is spent or invested will help create a new job and a new salary. And these new jobs and new salaries can create other jobs and other salaries and more customers and more growth for an expanding American economy. A Democratic president for tax cuts and for entrepreneurs. Go figure. How confusing is this so far, right? By the way, when he said January 1st, 1963, he gave the speech on August 13 of 62. He died next year, November 22nd. The tax bill went into effect 64 under Lyndon Johnson. And here's what it looked under Lyndon Johnson, and here's what it looked like. He took the top line from 91 to 70%, and he took corporate taxes from 52 to 48%. This is in 1964 when this came out. 17 years later, in 1981, we had the Economic Recovery Tax of 1981 by Ronald Reagan, which this is what Reagan did. Reagan lowered taxes pretty much for everybody. Tax rate, the top line went from 70 to 50, bottom from 14 to 11, capital gains went from 28% to 21, higher estate tax exemption went from 175,625 to 600,000 in 87. He established the IRA, the IRA for employees, and this was all helped through Arthur Laffer, the economist. And FYI, while Reagan came up with this in 1981, in 85, the IRS announced that America has officially produced 400,000 new millionaires due to Reagan's new tax laws. So now I'm going to stop right here because I don't want this thing to be a 30-minute episode. Obviously, after this, we have Bush Sr., we have Clinton, we have Bush, we have Obama, we have Trump, and then we have Biden today, right? But I want to kind of show you a couple trends I noticed here, a couple things. Number one, a lot of times you'll hear about taxes. Rich don't pay taxes, poor pay too much taxes, the rich don't pay any taxes. I wanted to find out who actually pays the most taxes and what has happened over the years. Are the rich paying less taxes or are the rich paying more taxes? And here's what the data tells us. So there's two charts I want you to look at. The first one is the percentage of taxpayers. This is directly from the IRS. Okay, percentage of taxpayers. Let's look at the bottom 50%. You can see the majority of the taxpayers is bottom 50%. Then the red is the top 25 to 50%. Then the gray is 5 to 10, the top 1 to 5%, and the black is the top 1%, the richest people. How big of a population there is of the top 1%, right? The next one directly from the IRS is the 1% paying more or less over the year. If you look at from 1980 to 2018, the top 1% keeps paying more and more and more taxes. So does the top 5%, but the top 10% is about the same from 1980 till today. The top 25% is getting smaller. The top 50% is getting smaller, but the bottom 50% is definitely getting smaller and smaller and paying taxes. Now, some of you may be watching this political, you're on the left, and you say, wait a minute, what are you saying? The top shouldn't be paying that much taxes? Look, the whole purpose of me doing it this way is to show how much contradiction there is on the left and the right. Why? Because everything about the timeline I showed was what? War, 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 war. Every time we have a war, there is consequences. Look how many times we have to raise taxes, come up with new taxes just to pay off debt from a war that we caused or we got involved in. This led me to find out how many military bases do we have worldwide? And how do we compare to other countries? If I were to ask you right now, how many military bases do you think U.S. has outside of the U.S. and how many countries? What would you say? You know what the number is? 800 foreign bases in 70 plus countries. Do you want to know how many military bases China has in foreign countries outside of China? You know how many it is? One is in Africa, right by the Suez Canal, the choke point. Why? Intentional. It's the only one they have because they're taking those resources and they're investing it in the current modern way of going to war. So now some of the folks on the right may be saying, well, what are you saying, Patrick? Are you saying taxes are going up because we're going to war too many times? Yes, America tends to get involved in too many wars that they don't need to be getting involved in. Why? Because of control. While instead of keeping that money and invested into infrastructure, maybe in a different way for military, we're allowing China to get stronger because they only have one military base. By the way, you want to know how many Russia? You want to know how many France? You want to know how many Britain have? You want to know how many total they have combined? 30. They have 30 foreign bases. We have 800. America has 8. What do you think is the cost of that? So you see what's happened when I'm showing these debt. By the way, here's the other part. So some of you guys are saying, well, that's right. Republicans are, spending way too much money. Now, if I were to ask you a different question, which president do you think increased the national debt the most by percentage? Which one do you think's at the top? Ready? So here we go. Top percentage of national debt increase during their term. First place, FDR. 1,050%. Second place, Woodrow Wilson, 727%. By the way, FDR came out with the New Deal. Woodrow Wilson came out with the 16th Amendment. Third place, Ronald Reagan, 186%. Fourth, George Bush, 101. Barack Obama, 74%, although he has the biggest dollar amount of $8.59 trillion increase. Then it's George H.W. Bush, then it's Ford, then it's Carter, then it's Nixon, then it's Trump. After taking a deep dive into the topic of taxes, I realized even more that taxes is not black and white. There's a lot of gray area, whether it's political, the influence of it, the cause of it with war. But I was curious the more I learned. I got another 50 pages that I haven't covered with you. If you want me to go even...
The citizens of Western Massachusetts initially responded to their situation as they did before the Declaration of Independence. They petitioned their government for a redress of grievances. Between 1784 to 1787, 73 rural Massachusetts citizens of Western Massachusetts initially responded to their situation as they did before the Declaration of Independence. They petitioned their government for a redress of grievances. Between 1784 to 1787, 73 rural Massachusetts towns, 30% of all towns, sent petitions to the legislature in Boston asking them to alleviate the burden on the farmers. This one from the town of Athol is typical. We, therefore, your petitioners, in behalf of the town assembly, shew we are reduced to the most distressing situation by suits being daily commenced against the inhabitants of this as well as many other parts of this commonwealth. Our jails filled, and still our debts not discharged, but our property daily diminishing greatly to the injury of the debtors. Therefore we beg your honors would take our situation into consideration and do something for the relief of your petitioners. For 4 years, these types of town petitions flooded the legislature. For 4 years, they were ignored by the legislature. On July 8, 1786, the Massachusetts legislature adjourned until January 31st, 1787. They again refused to address the petitions from the western section. The towns were now determined to act.
Every part of a merger or acquisition requires pinpoint attention to detail, so I use...
In order to determine how to respond to the news from Boston, towns began calling emergency meetings of their governing boards, called selectmen. On July 18th, the town of Pelham in Hampshire County called its meeting. As was the custom, town meetings were held at local taverns. In Pelham, it was Conkey's Tavern. The selectmen of Pelham decided to write letters to 11 other neighboring towns, calling for a meeting on July 31st at John Bruce's Inn. This meeting, in turn, produced a call for a convention of the entire Hampshire County. The selectmen of Pelham, in a letter to the selectmen of Amherst, stated the goal of the convention: find some method to change the state constitution and thus get a more responsive government. By July 23rd, a county convention was already held in Bristol. Meetings were also planned for Worcester, Middlesex, and Berkshire counties. Hampshire County met on August 22nd and was the largest. 50 Hampshire towns were represented. Among the notables in attendance were Hatfield's Colonel Seth Murray, John Hastings, Hatfield's representative to the state legislature, Benjamin Ely, West Springfield's former state representative, and William Pynchon, leader of West Springfield's most distinguished family. The convention was hardly a mob of lawless, indebted farmers. The convention proposed, submit a list of grievances and then break up the court next week. The list of grievances composed by Hampshire County contained 21 articles and gives us an insight into the ideological catalyst for Shaves' rebellion. Some of the main articles called for a radical change in the state government. First, the state constitution was to be amended. Second, the upper chamber of the legislature abandoned and qualifications for the lower revised. Third, there was to be a major revision in the state's court system. Fourth, the tax code was to be revised. Fifth, the scarcity of legal tender was to be addressed. Also, Hampshire County wanted the legislature to be called back into session immediately to address its grievances. This was not simply a call for relief of debt. In the minds of the citizens of Hampshire County, there was something seriously wrong with the government of Massachusetts. One area of major contention was the Constitution of 1780. In the fall of 1780, 3.5 years after declaring independence from Britain, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts held a statewide convention at Boston for the purpose of drafting a new constitution. The task was assigned to a committee consisting of Sam Adams, future Governor James Bowdoin, and John Adams. John Adams did most of the writing. The constitutional delegates were to return to Boston in the winter to ratify the Constitution. However, that winter was one of the worst in the history of Massachusetts. Many delegates from western Massachusetts could not make the trip because of impassable roads. Only 47 out of originally 247 towns were represented. Most of those towns were within 10 to 15 miles from Boston. These 47 towns made the final decision on what would constitute the text of the Constitution. Some of the articles contained in the new Constitution were particularly odious to the towns in western Massachusetts. The legislature, or general court as they called it, consisted of two chambers, an upper and lower. In order to hold office in the Senate, one had to have £300 in land holdings and £600 in total wealth. The requirement for holding office in the House of Representatives was £100 in land holdings within the town, or a total estate valued at £200. The requirement for holding office of governor was £1,000 in land. Many in western Massachusetts felt this disqualified many from office and ensured that the reins of government would remain in the hands of wealthy men, especially those in Boston. Further, the court system contained many complicated layers with an appointed judiciary. Many believed the judicial system created by the Constitution was unfair, as it complicated the legal system, thus increasing fees and enriching lawyers. Finally, no amendments to the new Constitution were to be allowed for 15 years. With this provision, many recognized that if the Constitution proved unjust, there would be no way to remedy the situation. Particularly offensive to those of western Massachusetts was the qualification for voting. The vote for state officers was limited to white men who had a net worth of £60. This was £20 more than required by the British under the old colonial charter. Several towns expressed their opposition to the voter qualification clause and property requirements for state office enumerated in the Constitution. 30 towns felt that any man who was respected in the community or who served in the militia and defended the Commonwealth should have the right to vote. The town of Coleraine on the voting clause protested, "Taxation without representation we consider unreasonable." On holding elective office, they added, "We consider money no qualification in this matter." Belchertown rejected property qualification for voting, saying that it denied that liberty and freedom which we this day are contending for. The town of Greenwich said it violated natural rights. New Salem suggested it was unjust to tax men without their consent. The town of Petersham said riches and dignity neither makes the head wiser nor the heart better. Interestingly, the future U.S. Constitution would allow the right to vote and the ability to hold federal office regardless of property holding. Professor Leonard Richards has this to say about the Constitution of 1780. The Constitution of 1780 undoubtedly consolidated power in the hands of the mercantile elite and the eastern part of the state. It shifted power from the rural backcountry to Boston, from the poor to the rich, and from town meetings to the state senate and governor's office. Towns in western Massachusetts would soon discover how the Senate and governor's office intended to use their power, especially when it concerned taxes. In financing the Revolutionary War, the federal government and the individual states amassed a heavy debt. It is estimated that the state's debt alone totaled $25 million. Much of that debt was created by the issuance of notes or IOUs that acted as payment for soldiers' salaries and supplies. Professor Richards tells us that Massachusetts issued about £1.5 million in these notes. Conservatively, this compares to about $600 million in today's money. The The holders of these notes, however, soon discovered that their value rapidly depreciated. Notes issued in 1778 quickly fell to 25% of their face value. By 1781, they fell to 2%. A note issued in 1778 for $8 was worth 16 cents in 1781. Massachusetts was not unique. Virginia's notes fell to 1/1000th of their face value. Federal notes fell to 1/40th. Soldiers who received pay in these notes were particularly hurt by their depreciation. Many, in order to feed their families and keep their farms functioning, parted with them at steep discounts. Also, former soldiers who were now farmers experiencing hard economic times often sold their notes, some at a 90% loss. Following the war, the difficult question before the state governments was how to redeem the notes. Should they be redeemed at face value or at the current market value? The Massachusetts legislature, dominated by Boston's mercantile interests, decided to redeem the notes at face value. It was the only state to do so. This decision left the state of Massachusetts with an enormous debt. However, it also allowed some men the possibility of becoming very wealthy. While it is impossible to trace the identity of all those who eventually wound up with the Massachusetts notes, it is known that 80% of those who speculated in the notes lived within or near Boston. 35 men held almost 40% of the notes. Since most of these notes were bought at steep discounts, these men stood to reap a bonanza if the notes were paid at face value. One of these men was James Bowdoin, president of the committee that drafted the Constitution of 1780, the first president of the only bank in Boston, and governor from 1785 to 1787. He held 3,290 pounds in state notes. William Phillips, who succeeded Bowdoin as bank president, held notes equaling 28,000 pounds. Phillips' partner, Jonathan Mason, amassed 30,000 pounds in notes. It is suspected that most of Phillips and Mason's notes came from former soldiers. Of all the 35 men who held 40% of the Massachusetts state debt, either they or a close relative served in the state house in the 1780s. Undoubtedly, these men had a vested interest in how their notes would be paid. Once the Massachusetts legislature had determined to pay its outstanding notes at face value, it in effect doubled its debt. The question now was how to pay it. First, Massachusetts stipulated that the owners of the notes would be paid in hard money. Second, it was decided that starting in 1784, the debt would be paid by 1789. In order to satisfy these measures, heavy taxes payable in hard money would be required. Massachusetts decided upon two tax-raising measures. The first was a property tax, which accounted for 60% of the taxes. The second was a poll tax. All males over 16 years of age were required to pay a head tax. Some question the equitability of these taxes. Historian David Satmary notes that the property tax favored the mercantile interests centered in Boston. Most of their assets were in stock. They therefore paid little tax compared to landowners. The remainder of the burden fell largely on the yeomanry. Leonard Richards makes this comment about the tax situation. Only about 10% of the taxes were to come from import duties and excises, which fell mainly on people who were most able to pay. The other 90% was direct taxes on property, with land bearing a disproportionate share, and polls. The latter was especially regressive, since it mattered not a whit if a male 16 years of age or older had any property or not. Rich or poor, he was going to have to pay the same amount, and altogether polls were going to pay at least 1/3 of all taxes. The fact that the tax burden appeared to be shifted to farmers with grown sons to the benefit of some in Boston was not lost on the farmers. In 1785, James Bowdoin was selected as governor after John Hancock decided not to run. Unlike former Governor John Hancock, Bowdoin insisted that all the taxes be collected. Leonard Richards notes the prospects Western farmers faced under a Bowdoin administration. The combined load of overdue taxes and new taxes was more than many residents could pay in a year, 5 years, or even a lifetime. Taxes under Great Britain were minimal compared to the new rates. Both Rufus King, future signer of the U.S. Constitution, and John Adams expressed sentiments that taxes were heavier than the people could bear. A heavy tax burden imposed on many who could not participate in the electoral process, an economic depression, and a non-representative government created a volatile situation in western Massachusetts. The people were now ready to respond. 1 week after the Hampshire County meeting on August 29, 1786, several hundred well-organized men from the towns of Pelham and Greenwich, under the command of Captain Joseph Hines and Militia Captain Deacon John Thompson, marched toward Northampton with the intention of closing the Court of Common Pleas. These are the courts that judge dead suits. The town of Pelham asked Daniel Shays to lead the men of Pelham, but he refused. Along the way, they were joined by a large contingent of men from Amherst, commanded by Captain Joel Billings. As they approached Northampton, they met another large group from Springfield, under Captain Luke Day. Day had served as a captain in the Continental Army from the siege of Boston to the siege of Yorktown. The following morning, about 1,500 protesters entered Northampton and proceeded to the courthouse. Captain Day stood on the steps with a petition for the judges. It stated that it was inconvenient to the people of the state for the courts to sit that day and entreated the judges to adjourn until the petitions of the conventions might be granted by the General Court. The court was subsequently closed. The protesters came to adopt the name Regulators. The term was used for North Carolina protesters in the 1760s who took up arms against corrupt British officials. On September 5th, several hundred regulators closed down the court in Worcester County. The Worcester County militia refused to stop the closing. In fact, many joined the uprising. Government officer General Jonathan Warner commented, "Notwithstanding the most pressing orders, there did appear universally a reluctance in the people to turn out for the support of government." Chief Justice Artemus Ward noted that the militia in Worcester was too generally in favor of the people's measures. Governor Bowdoin was in shock. The following week, Captain Job Shattuck and 100 men closed the Middlesex County Court in Concord. On September 26, 1786, the Supreme Judicial Court was to convene in Springfield. Although protected by some 800 men in a militia under General William Shepard, 1,200 men under the command of Luke Day and Daniel Shays succeeded in closing the court. Daniel Shays apparently began taking a more active role in the uprising. Shays, a farmer and also a former captain in the Continental Army, had been honored with a sword by Lafayette for his distinguished service. Throughout September and October, courts were also closed in Great Barrington and Taunton. To complicate matters for the legislature, some politicians were becoming sympathetic to the insurgents' cause. Moses Harvey from the state legislature in Hampshire County, a former captain in the Continental Army, now captain in the state militia, refused to back the state and join the rebellion. He characterized the state legislature as thieves, knaves, robbers, and highwaymen. Dr. William Whiting, Chief Justice of the Berkshire County Court, called them overgrown plunderers. Influential men in Boston began calling for harsh measures to put down the insurrection. Samuel Adams commented, "In monarchies, the crime of treason and rebellion may admit to being pardoned or lightly punished, but the man who dares rebel against the laws of a republic ought to suffer death." The legislature passed the Militia Act on October 24th. It declared, "Whosoever, officer or soldier, shall abandon any post committed to his charge, or shall speak words inducing others to do the like in time of engagement, shall suffer death." A riot act was passed on October 28th, which declared, "Sheriffs and other officials shall be indemnified and held guiltless for killing rioters who failed to disperse or resisted capture, and that the rioters shall forfeit all their lands, tenements, goods, and chattels to the Commonwealth." On November 10th, 2 weeks later, a resolution suspending habeas corpus was enacted. This allowed the government to imprison rioters without a trial. Some concessions to farmers were made. Certain taxes could be paid in kind for some back taxes, and the payment of current taxes were to be delayed until April 1st, 1787. These measures did not appease the regulators. The protests continued. On November 28th, Governor Bowdoin issued an arrest warrant for 5 men. All 5 were Revolutionary War veterans. The man they most wanted was Job Shattuck. He was 50 years old and the largest landowner in Groton, with 500 acres and a 3-story house. On the 30th, 400 horsemen captured Shattuck and 2 others. Shattuck was slashed across the knee with a saber, taken to Boston, and jailed without trial. The capture and wounding of Shattuck seems to have radicalized the farmers in the western part of the state. Some men made their feelings public. Sylvanus Billings, in an address to the good people of Boylston, stated that tyrants who are fighting for the promotion and to advance their interest, which will destroy the good people of this land. He said there was no other choice but to join the rebels. Dr. Isaac Chenery of Holden proclaimed, "Living under rulers that have been cutting and hacking our people was not to be suffered. He would rather be under the devil than such a government as this." He now prayed for the overthrow of the government. In December, Daniel Shays and Luke Day rode to Springfield, leading 300 well-drilled regulators. They took possession of the Court of Common Pleas and petitioned the judges not to convene. The judges took their advice and adjourned. On January 4th, 1787, Governor Bowdoin, without legislative authority, decided to hire an army for the purpose of putting down the rebellion. The call went out for 4,400 men to be commanded by former Revolutionary War General Benjamin Lincoln. To fund the army, Bowdoin turned to Boston businessmen. 153 private citizens, including banker William Phillips and Bowdoin himself, contributed to the cause. None of the 153 served in the army. The regulators, realizing that they would be at a serious disadvantage to the well-equipped force, decided to capture the federal armory at Springfield. The armory contained several cannons and 7,000 new muskets. They organized about 1,400 men into 3 groups under Shays, Eli Parsons, and Luke Day. They chose January 25th as the day to attack. Unfortunately for the regulators, General William Shepard had already occupied the arsenal with 1,200 militia. Shays and Parsons attacked on the 25th, however, due to a miscommunication. Day and his men never participated in the attack. As Shays and Parsons' men moved on the armory, Shepard issued a warning to cease the advance. After the regulators refused, Shepard had his men fire volleys of grape shot into the regulators. Most of the men ran. 4 men were killed, and 20 were wounded. Most of the regulators fled north toward Amherst and Northampton. The regulators reorganized at Petersham. However, on the nights of February 3rd through 4th, Benjamin Lincoln's army surprised them. Most of the leaders, including Daniel Shays, fled to New Hampshire and then on into Vermont. On February 16th, the legislature passed the Disqualification Act. Pardons were offered to privates and non-commissioned officers who took part in Shays' rebellion. The terms consisted of the following. First, the rebels must take an oath of allegiance and pay a 9-pence fine. Second, they must turn in their guns. Third, they barred all rebels from serving on juries, holding town office or other office. Fourth, they barred all rebels from voting for military or civil officers. Fifth, they barred them from employment as schoolmasters, innkeepers, or sellers of spirits. However, if they could prove their unfailing allegiance to the state on or after May 1st, 1788, they would no longer be barred from being a juror, voting, or being members of government or certain professions. Reverend Bezaleel Howard, pastor of the First Church of Springfield, stated, "The severe and tyrannical Disqualification Act was the product of a wicked and corrupt heart." Following the rout at Petersham, the regulators were no longer a serious threat to the government of Massachusetts. There were a few minor battles and skirmishes, but the rebellion died with a whimper. Governor Chittenden and Ethan Allen of Vermont refused to turn over the insurgent leaders to Massachusetts, even though they were living on a farm next to the governor. About 4,000 regulators signed oaths of allegiance. Through those historical documents, it was found that many of these men were pillars of their community. All of the leaders were eventually pardoned. 2 men were hanged for looting. Did Shays' rebellion help the farmers in western Massachusetts? In May 1787, John Hancock soundly defeated James Bowdoin for governor. The legislature of 1787 put a moratorium on debts and significantly cut direct taxes by 90%. In 1786, the average family in western Massachusetts had to pay nearly £3 for every male 16 years or older. In the next 5 years combined, the total was less than half that amount. The annual tax rate in towns like Amherst, Pelham, and Coleraine dropped from 25 shillings to less than 2 shillings. Indirect taxes, excises, and imposts no longer went to pay interest on the state notes. Subsequently, interest on the state notes fell into arrears, and notes depreciated about 30% on the Boston market. The speculators would have to find another way to reap a fortune through their notes. A consolidation of state debt by the federal government was their last hope. Historian Leonard Richards notes that the movement for a stronger national government was well on its way when the rebellion began. Since 1781, leaders throughout the states, sensing a deficiency in the Articles of Confederation, had been calling for its revision. Many believed that Congress had to be granted more power over the states in order for the nation to succeed. Even George Washington was in the nationalist camp. However, since he had retired from public life, he did not actively promote any policy. The uncertainty of what a change in the Articles would do to the balance of power between the states and the federal government dissuaded many from acting. Others, however, had stronger opinions. Alexander Hamilton of New York and other nationalists sought a powerful federal government and proposed a wholesale revision of the Articles. This was no easy task, since changing the Articles required consent of the legislature of all 13 states. But the nationalists had a plan. In September 1786, the Annapolis Convention endorsed a resolution by Alexander Hamilton that all 13 states send delegates to a general convention to be held at Philadelphia in May 1787. The stated goal of the General Convention was to devise such further provisions as shall appear to them necessary to render the Constitution of the federal government adequate to the exigencies of the Union. In order for the Philadelphia Convention to be a success, they needed a leader to give the convention credibility. They needed George Washington. Shays' rebellion provided the means for getting him there. The letter sent by Henry Knox to George Washington in October 1786 was typical of many he received during the rebellion. Knox's letter to George Washington was more than a simple update on the disturbances in Massachusetts. He writes, "The powers of Congress are totally inadequate to preserve the balance between the respective states." Knox is clearly a nationalist and suggests to Washington that the Articles of Confederation are inadequate to maintaining the peace. He continues on concerning Shays' Rebellion. "The fine theoretic government of Massachusetts has given way, and its laws are trampled underfoot. Men at a distance are apt to accuse the rulers and say that taxes have been assessed too high and collected too rigidly. This is a deception. The people who are the insurgents have never paid any or by very little taxes." As we have seen, it seems Knox is the one using deception. He goes on as to the motivation of the regulators. "The creed is that the property of the United States has been protected from the confiscations of Britain by the joint exertions of all, and therefore ought to be the common property of all. They are chiefly of the young and active part of the community." However, Knox seems to be mischaracterizing the ideology of the regulators. They were obviously not communists seeking to possess others' property. They were often pillars of the community, seeking lower taxes and a fair legal system. Knox continues, "Our government must be braced, changed, or altered to secure our lives and property." Knox tells Washington that if the present government is not changed, lives and property are in danger. Knox is intimating that the Articles of Confederation had to be changed to allow for a national military response to a rebellion like Shays'. In light of Shays' rebellion, scores of letters like this one seem to sway Washington. Interestingly, however, Thomas Jefferson did not seem alarmed at the events in Massachusetts. Concerning Shays' rebellion, in a letter to James Madison, he wrote, "I hold it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing." Shortly after Knox's letter to Washington, a letter from James Madison arrived. Madison indicated that he had taken the liberty of putting Washington's name at the head of the list of delegates to attend the convention in Philadelphia. He thought this would add a very solemn dress and all the weight that could be derived from a single state. Eventually, Washington agreed to come out of retirement and go to the convention. What was the effect of Washington's presence at the Constitutional Convention? Professor Richards writes, "His participation in the formation of the new Constitution provided the most effective propaganda the Nationalists could engage to accomplish their objectives." What were the objectives of the Nationalists? Not simply a revision of the Articles, but the formation of an entirely new system of government. Shays' Rebellion was an important event in making it come about.
This is Secret Life of Symbols.
Today, we're going to talk about corporations. The United States of America no longer exists. And the reason why it doesn't exist, we are now a corporation. We're not a country. And the reason why is because many years ago, there was something happened here called the Civil War. And the Civil War, we're told, was one of the bloodiest wars humans have ever fought on the earth. It was a very bloody war. And so after it was over, it was understood that we are now, after the war, many things, but united was not one of them. One half of the country was killing the other half. And there's a lot of bad feelings among the Americans back and forth between North and South. Well, it was decided, all right, then let's do this. Let's have a United States corporation. We'll start a company. We'll call it the United States Corporation. It'll be a privately run municipal corporation. And we'll call it the United States Corporation. So therefore, everyone who is here will become an employee of the corporation. And if you're working for this corporation, when you're on duty, you always usually have some sort of an identification tag showing that you're an employee of the company. As long as you are working and you're making money, then you are contributing to the company, the corporation. You're on the company time, so to speak. And so you are making money, and therefore you're paying out bills and paying out taxes and fines and fees and all that. And so you are securing the corporation. They need the money, and so you're giving them the money. You're making the money and giving it to them. So you are a security. Water is the basis for our economics, period, on the earth. Because in the ancient world, going far back as the earliest times in the Roman Empire, the powers that be in the world then realized that they started to build their economic system in the Roman Empire based on the Phoenician Canaanite system of commerce in the Middle East. because they knew how to make money and they knew how to control money. So the ancient Romans understood and finally figured out that there should be two laws on the earth. The earth is two things. The earth is water and land. So there should be a law for the water and a law for the land. So today we even have terms that say, well, that's the law of the land. Why do you distinguish it law of the land? Because there's another law called the law of the sea, or the law of water. So the law of the land is the laws that govern the culture of people on a particular spot of land. And so when you go to another country, you should be aware that there's a law of the land, which means there's a custom. You have to get used to the way people live and the way they do things. There's another law that supersedes that law, which is far more important. It's called the law of the sea. And the law of the sea is a law of water. And the law of water is simply banking, banks. Banks are all over the world. All banks operate the same. They operate on water. And so the bottom line is that your commerce is based on water. All ships, airships, rocket ships, sailing ships, I don't care what it is. If it's a ship, it's always referred to as a female. It's always she. The captains of any ship will tell you, oh, she's a good ship and she's seaworthy and oh, she's this and she's that. What do you mean she? The reason why captains call their ships she is because she delivers the product. And the product is usually based on water, and when her water breaks, there's a product. And the product was caused by the male manufacturing. So he has manufactured and she is in labor building the product. And so the product is based on water because when her water broke, the product comes out. If you're going to get married, you have to have a license because getting married, according to our laws today under the corporation, if you are getting married, you are an employee whose first duty is to the corporation. And so therefore you need to work and pay your bills and pay your taxes and everything because you're a security for the body social. The body social means the whole company. When you retire, which means you're going to bed, you're going to sleep, or you're going to quit, you're going to retire, you get social security. No, you are the security for the body social. And so they're going to give you a few dollars to live on, keep you alive, because if they don't, you're going to get all very upset. You don't have any money to live on, and you're going to cause more trouble. Give him something to live on and get him out of here, right? When a ship pulls into port, because I said all of our commerce is done by water, our biggest business is shipping. All over the world, shipping. When a ship pulls into harbor, it parks at its what we call its berth. It's a berth where they're berthing the ship, B-E-R-T-H. And so any item that was on that ship represents money. Therefore, every time a television or a car or anything, whatever that item is that's being brought here from another country, that's coming in on a ship, and she is bringing in the product, right? She. When the ship parks, it's sitting in its berth. And therefore, every single item coming off of that ship has to have its own certificate of manifest. Why? Because yesterday the ship wasn't here. But this morning you come to work and there's a ship here with $800 million worth of Toyotas. So it's manifested. So you have to have a manifest. And it's called a certificate of manifest, which goes with each one of those products. And on that manifest, it tells you, is it a 4-door? Is it 2-door? Does it have air conditioning? What nationality is it? How much does the baby weigh? What color eyes does he have? And, and does he have 5 fingers? And is he African or what? Does he have air conditioning? So you are simply a product because you are a product that has to have its own certificate of birth. So therefore you have today something called a birth certificate. And it has to be signed by the dock because that's what that ship is sitting at the dock. And if you happen by chance to have one of the cars or one of the TVs drop off in the ocean, that's okay. There are insurances to cover that, but you have to have a death certificate. Why? Because you're not just going to lose a car and the bank is not going to make money on that. You lost a car? Yeah, well, you better go find it. And if you can't find it, then you need to go through the regulations and sign a death certificate. And that's why, as I said, that's why you have to have a license, because this is a corporation. And used to, when we were a republic, you could wear a gun anytime you wanted, and you could go into town and go in the bar, and if you have a falling out with a guy in the bar, you can either settle it like gentlemen, or you can go out in the street and duel. And one of you is not going home tonight, see? Why? Because it was a free country, and individuals, men and women and children, when this country was founded, was said to be, and it was understood that you are a sovereign in this country. That's why you could wear a gun anytime you wanted. Cowboys wear guns, and then people even in the eastern states will wear guns. Why? Because you are a sovereign under international law. Anyone born in the United States of America was a sovereign, which means you're a king or a queen. And so the man was king of his realm, king of his home, and women were the queens. A king and a queen have the privilege of declaring war on any time they please on anyone they please. That's one of the nice things about being a king. You don't need to ask anybody permission. You want to go out and pick a fight? Well, you better have a gun with you. It doesn't mean you're going to win. It doesn't mean you're smart for doing that. It just means you're armed and you're going to face another guy and he's armed. So you better figure out if you can do this or not, right?
And what it also means is something that's very important. So if we Google the word independent, on Google it says free from outside control, not depending on another's authority, not depending on another for livelihood or substance, an independent person or body. On Brave, you look up independent definition and you will find not governed by a foreign power, self-governing, free from the influences, guidance, or control of another or others, self-reliant, not determined or influenced by someone or something else, not contingent.
Now we understand that your body is like 78% water. And when you come out of your mother, her water broke. So therefore, everything we do in commerce is based on water. And that being the case, it's based on shipping. The idea is don't rock the boat when you're at work. Don't rock the boat. We run a tight ship here. We don't want to rock the boat. And so are you with us, mate? Yeah, come aboard on the citizenship. And so now you got the dealership and sportsmanship and citizenship and all the different kind of words that end in ship. Why do you have banks? Where do you find banks? Banks are on both.
So let's look up citizen. A person owing loyalty to an entitled by birth or naturalization to the protection of a state or nation, a resident of a city or town, especially one entitled to vote and enjoy other privileges there, a civilian. What is a sovereign? One that exercises supreme permanent authority, especially in a nation or other governmental unit, as a king, queen, or other noble person who serves as a chief of state, a ruler or a monarch, a national governing council or committee. What is a vassal? A person who held land from a feudal lord and received protection in return for homage and allegiance. A bondman, a slave, a subordinate, or a dependent. Determined, influenced, or controlled by something else, subordinate to another clause, phrase, or word, relying on or requiring the aid or support of another. In voodoo belief and popular folklore, a corpse that has been reanimated, especially by means of supernatural power or spell. One who looks or behaves like automaton, a computer, connected to the internet and controlled by remote unauthorized user to perform malicious tasks without the owner being aware. Got lots of those today.
On both sides of a river. They're called river banks. What does a river bank do? It directs the flow of the currency. Money runs through your hands like water. No, money is water. That's when you put it into a bank, it's called currency. Because it's a current, it's an ebb and flow. Comes in and goes out, and comes in and goes out. It's a flow of money, and then money is water. Money is a cash flow, a liquid asset. There's a reason why everything works the way it does. In a corporation, let's say you work for General Electric or Ford Motor Company, General Electric cannot make law like stamped in stone. Whatever General Electric does, they don't have the power to create law. But they do have the power as a corporation to make their policy. And so they will tell you, look, it's just our policy. There's no damn law. There's no law that says it. But our policy is for you to show up at 7 o'clock in the morning. That's just our policy. And our policy says that you take off at 11:30 for lunch and you go home at 4 o'clock. That's just our policy. It's not written in stone in God's law. It's just our policy. So today, you ask any politician, what kind of law do we have in this country today? And they would tell you it's called public policy. It's a policy. It's not law. Who came up with that policy? Well, we have policy makers. Oh, really? Policy makers? Oh, okay. Yeah, they're lawmakers. They're the lawmakers. They make the policy. They don't make law. They make a policy. And it's just our policy that you do this and you do that, and you go 65 on the highway, and you do this, you park there, and these are all just our policy. And the police will see to it, you abide by it. So that's where the police come in. Because back in the John Wayne days, in the cowboy and Indians, there was no police. Why? Because you have a constitution. You're a free man and can do whatever you please to do. But you take care of yourself. There's no government checks. There's no government anything. You just take care of yourself. And if you want to buy a gun, buy 10 of them. It doesn't matter. Nobody cares. You're free as an American. But today, you're no longer an American. You are a U.S. citizen. U.S. is a privately owned company, a corporation. It's called a municipal corporation. It's a company. Well, according to corporate law, you have to have, this is in all corporate law, you've got to have a president of the corporation. That's just corporate law. You've got to have a vice president of the corporation, and you've got to have a secretary treasurer. Because those three guys are the main ones that handle the money. And since we are giving you permission, I'm giving you permission because I'm playing the part of God. I am the corporation, 1870. But if I'm going to give you the privilege, and you can be a corporation too. But I gave you permission. So I want 20% off the top. You understand? It's just business. When we're talking about the Federal Reserve, first thing you need to understand is where is the Federal Reserve's corporate headquarters? Because it's going to tell you something when you find out. Corporate headquarters for the Internal Revenue and the Federal Reserve is in Puerto Rico, not the United States Corporation. And why is it in Puerto Rico? Because Puerto Rico was picked a long time ago, over 1,000 years ago. It was picked by the pirates of the Caribbean. That's why today Puerto Rico houses the Federal Reserve and the Internal Revenue. It's because the Federal Reserve is today the pirates of the Caribbean. When you begin to see that this is the whole setup in the Federal Reserve and the Internal Revenue, it's just piracy. It's just the pirates of the Caribbean, and that's where they started. So what was the symbol for the pirates of the Caribbean? Well, their flag was a black flag with a skull and crossbones, and it was referred to as the Jolly Roger. Well, today, the skull and crossbones are a very important symbol used in World Freemasonry. It's used on toxic and poisonous medicines and things. Skull and crossbones basically meant death. Well, that's what piracy in the Caribbean was like. It was a very dangerous and deadly game where they were stealing on the high seas. And so when you're stealing something on the high seas, then you have to deal with an admiral, which gives us our word admiralty law. Admiralty law is the law of the high seas. England, in order to travel the world and do what they did to build their great empire, were great seafaring peoples. Their navies were next to none. And so this is where the idea that even in England today, they have such a thing as an admiralty. And so it gives birth to an admiralty law, which means it's giving birth to a law based on water. Why? Because England was the masters of the seas after the Spanish. And so today, it's just interesting that the Federal Reserve and the Internal Revenue are corporate headquarters in the Caribbean. As it still is today, ships will carry their own flag so that anyone else on the sea will see that ship with that flag and understand who owns it and who's controlling that ship. Well, they developed an idea a long time ago among the pirates to fool their victims, and they would put up a flag of a country that was friendly with, I guess, the other ships coming, and so the other ships would not think anything about it until they got close enough to attack them. Then they would send up their Jolly Roger flag, the flag that represents the pirates. Then the people on the other ship know they're so close now. They thought it was a friendly ship. Now they find out it's a pirate ship. And so that's where we get the concept today of a false flag. And my goodness, there are false flags everywhere in the world that we live today. So many people think that if you trust some country or trust somebody to do something for you and he's got a friend, and then one day you find out they're not your friend. They've never been your friend. Then we see the idea of a false flag. People putting up the false colors. And we even say that kind of thing today, that, wow, I was with so-and-so last night, he showed his true colors. True colors? What do you mean? A false flag? Yeah, because he's always been nice, he's always been courteous, and last night he was horrible. So now he's showing his true colors. So that tells me he's been putting up a false flag all this time. Now we know who he really is, or how he really thinks. I would say, first of all, it's not federal, and it's not a reserve, because it isn't. There has no reserves. They just print money. And they don't really print money. They print what they call a Federal Reserve note. And it says on the Federal Reserve note, it says this note is a legal tender for privates, public and private. And then it used to also say that you could take this to the bank and turn it in for real money. That's what it said on the bills. 50 to 100 years ago, it was saying on the bill, you can take this to the bank and turn it in for real money. So right off the bat, they're telling you this is not money. It represents money, but it's not money. And so you don't have to go around with gold coins buying everything. Just take the dollar bills that represents the gold coin. But the problem is the government and the founding of this country, the Constitution doesn't say that it's all right to have paper that represents money. No. Money is gold and silver, period. End of the day, that's it. It's either silver or gold or it's not money. And so if you're going to print paper, and incidentally, in California, the 1848 California Constitution, there's two of them, 1848, and I think the other was 1869. But the 1848 original Constitution for California expressly says, no banking can be done within the state of California. California will not allow any banks to exist in the state of California, period. You can have private corporations who will deal within themselves, but no bank can operate within the state of California. Then later on, they had a civil war, and after the Civil War, well, things changed a little bit. So now you can have a bank in California. So many of our wars are actually economic. The Federal Reserve, I think it was established back in 1913. The way it was established was that the bankers in America, who were not actually American, they were living in America, but they were actually British-backed bankers, J.P. Morgan, bankers like that who actually came from Europe and from England, they got together and they decided to put together a trick and to see if it would work. And so they got together on a private island off of the coast of Georgia. And I'm not an authority on this, but it's well known that these men met on this island called Jekyll Island. Why would it be called Jekyll, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Is because these bankers were not interested in protecting America. They were interested in buying off everything in America for their British masters. And so they came up with an idea that we will produce paper money which represents money, and if we can get that across through the Congress and the Senate agrees to that, then we will also add a little something we forgot to tell you. It is called fractional banking. Fractional banking means every dollar we publish, that we give to you, that dollar can make us, you can multiply it by 10, by 9 or 10. So when somebody puts $1 into the bank on deposit, the bank can then say that deposit was $10. Well, if you put in 100, the bank can say on their records that you put 1,000 in. But if you put $1 million in, the bank now says that you put $10 million in. And that's how America has become so powerful around the world. Because no matter how much money no matter how many Federal Reserve notes we have, there may be millions in the bank, but you can multiply it by 10. And so therefore, my goodness, then you can multiply that later by 10. And now you've got a country that has a massive amount of money. If you put, say, $10 in the bank is allowed to loan out to other people 100. Because they can multiply anything that comes into the bank, they can multiply it by 10. It's called fractional banking. It's pretty well known that there is an organization in the world today called the Round Table Group. And their idea of this Round Table Group is a round table of the big bankers, the big shots that run the British Empire. And they come together and they sit at a round table. Why they are required to sit at a round table? Because the idea is not one of them is the boss of bosses. It's a group, and they're all equal around the table, but they're all bankers, and they're all working for the same cause. And so ultimately, people don't realize that all around the world, especially in America, you're buying things, you're purchasing things. And so in 1902, these bankers, these London bankers, they met in 1902, and the idea was that they were going to slowly but surely infiltrate into the United States' business and ultimately get the United States of America into debt, and so that they will ultimately be able to own the United States of America for England. We have documented evidence that the Federal Reserve is a part of that plan to actually take over America and do it in such a way as to get America involved in business so that eventually the British banking cartels around the world will ultimately own the corporation called United States. And so that's what happened today. We are now under the authority of the British government, in point of fact. Under this system of the Federal Reserve, it was supposed to be, what we were told is that the Federal Reserve was being put together to protect the fluctuation in business. Sometimes we make money, sometimes we're broke, but to make sure that we always have a nice, even flow of money, we need someone to control that. And so once they bought into that idea and accepted the Federal Reserve, now you've had 2 world wars, and God knows how many wars are going on each day that the Federal Reserve is financing the militaries around the world. And the more you finance the militaries, the bigger the wars get. And now they're all over the world. And so we see that as any normal big fight, any prize fight, you've got to have a fight promoter. And this person is the fight promoter, is going to put up the money for the fight and finance the event and pay all the bills for everybody. But he's the fight promoter. Why? He's spending millions of dollars. But he's spending millions because he's going to make multiple millions on the fight. So we have today the Federal Reserve and the Internal Revenue and this secret government that's operating out of London. And ultimately, they are the fight promoters. They're causing the wars all around the world. And United States citizens and people are getting involved in these wars, never realizing these wars are being financed to have a fight, period. They're called fight promoters. I'm Jordan Maxwell, and thank you for watching.
John D. Rockefeller seized U.S. media. He also hijacked U.S. medicine. When it was around the same time that John D. Rockefeller seized U.S. media, he also hijacked U.S. medicine. When it was discovered that drugs could be produced from petroleum, America's top oil mogul ordered his army of propagandists to invert reality accordingly. Medicines used for thousands of years were suddenly classified as alternative, while the new, petroleum-based, highly addictive, and patentable drugs were declared the gold standard. After buying the German pharmaceutical company that manufactured chemicals of war for Adolf Hitler, Rockefeller leveraged his political influence by pressing Congress to declare natural healing modalities unscientific quackery. Rockefeller then took control of the American Medical Association and began offering massive grants to top medical schools under the mandate that only his approved curriculum be taught. Any mention of the healing powers of herbs, plants, and diet was erased from most medical textbooks. Doctors and professors who objected to Rockefeller's plan were crucified by the media, removed from the AMA, and stripped of their license to teach and practice medicine. Those who dared to speak out were arrested and jailed. When evidence began to emerge that petroleum-based medicines were causing cancer, Mr. Rockefeller founded the American Cancer Society, through which he suppressed that information. John D. Rockefeller is duly credited as the founder of the pharmaceutical industry, and the reason that medical error is currently the 3rd leading cause of death in America. This is not an indictment against doctors. More than anyone, they are under the stranglehold of the single largest lobbying power in Washington. Every year, the pharmaceutical industry spends at least twice the amount as big oil to influence laws, policies, and public perception. Thanks to Mr. Rockefeller, the architect of American monopolies, no industry has more power over our lives than Big Pharma.
Sabbatai Zevi declared himself to be the Jewish Messiah in the year 1666. This false Messiah led the largest Messiah movement in Jewish history and attracted more than half the population of European Jews. How did he do it? By promising to return the Jews to their ancestral homeland in Palestine. Sabbatai Zevi made everything that was holy unholy. He rejected the rules of the Jewish holy books and every standard of Jewish decency. There would be no more guilt or sin or right or wrong. No more sexual taboos, no more 10 commandments, no more fasting. Instead, there would be feasting. Sabbatai Zevi's immoral leadership finally fell from grace when the Sultan of Turkey threatened him with torture unless he converted to Islam. Sabbatai converted to Islam, but he brought his infectious evil theology with him. 1 century later, Jacob Frank proclaimed himself to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi and the living Messiah for all Jews. Not even Sabbatai Zevi was as evil as Jacob Frank and his disciples. Jacob Frank rejected traditional Judaism. He reversed the truth and told his followers, since we can't all be saints, let's all be sinners. The best way to imitate God, said Frank, is to cross every boundary, transgress every taboo, and mix, as God did, the sacred with the profane. Orgies, incest, rape, and sexual intercourse with children, including sodomy on young boys, were no longer sinful. In 1773, Jacob Frank traveled to Frankfurt, Germany, the birthplace of the Illuminati. That's where he formed an unholy alliance with Adam Weishaupt and Mayor Amschel Rothschild's banking dynasty. The ambition of the Rothschild dynasty was to win control of the world's gold, central banks, and wealth. The Rothschilds sent John Jacob Astor, Jacob Schiff, and Paul Warburg to America, where they influenced the privatization of the Federal Reserve banking system and the dismantling of the American Constitution. The goal of Weishaupt and the Jesuits was to take control of the Vatican and its hierarchy of Catholic clergy. Weishaupt formed the Order of the Illuminati and infiltrated the Freemasonic lodges with his doctrine until every Masonic lodge in every nation accepted it. The Frankist goal was the destruction and replacement of Jewish ethics with a satanic religion based on the exact opposite of Jewish teachings. When this unholy alliance of conscienceless men was seeded, a cancerous war against humanity erupted. With Rothschild financing, Jacob Frank became fabulously wealthy and was put in charge of spreading a Luciferian theology that would be the hidden hand behind future wars and revolutions. Jacob Frank's followers were called Sabbatean Frankists. They practiced witchcraft and occult rituals, including animal and human sacrifices. Lucifer, they declared, was the true God. The Sabbatean Frankists expanded their movement by masquerading as converts to other religions. They converted to Catholicism and to Islam, where they embedded themselves and spread their Luciferian infection as closeted crypto-Jews. The Frankists traded their wives and daughters with members and with powerful non-members who they needed to seduce into their cult. Jewish professor Gershon Scholem called Jacob Frank one of the most frightening men in Jewish history. By 1776, Orthodox Jewish rabbis and leaders rejected Jacob Frank and the pagan invasion of evil that took hold in 18th century Europe. They declared Jacob Frank and his Luciferian followers to be heretics. Jewish author and historian Dr. Henry Makow has thoroughly researched the Sabbatean Frankist movement.
Sabbatean Frankists were out and out Satanists. They believe that they have to defy any kind of natural morality, defy any kind of natural law, defy God, and they actually indulge in every kind of depravity as a form of worship, because they worship Satan. And they promoted promiscuity, and that's where our promiscuity today comes from. It's 200 or 300 years old. There's nothing new or avant-garde about it. They promoted incest, they promoted pedophilia, and every kind of sexual depravity.
America's Zionist-owned media falsely reported that Iran's President Ahmadinejad threatened to wipe Israel off the map. This was a mistranslation. What the president of Iran really said is that Israel is occupying Palestine and has no legitimacy on the world map. Traditional Torah Jews and rabbis agree with him. There is speculation that the revolutionary document called the Protocols of Zion is a secret Sabbatean Frankist document. This document embodies 24 protocols which map out a detailed Zionist plan for global control. The protocols, written in the late 1700s, describe in precise detail the world domination plan that is unfolding today. Rabbi Marvin Antelman charges that the world today is ruled by a Sabbatean Frankist satanic cult that has conspired with the Illuminati to destroy all religions and fuse all nations into one.
I have joining me today Dr. and Rabbi Marvin Antelman. Welcome to the show, Rabbi.
Thank you very much for having me here. First of all, let me say this. There are a lot of conspiracy theories out there. I'm not interested in theories. I'm interested in facts. So the scholarship over the years that I've utilized are sources that are impeccable. A man by the name of Shabbatai Tzvi, who was born in 1626 and died in 1676, came along and said, I am the Messiah. And he had a tremendous following. When it was realized that his following was so great, there would be problems, the Sultan gave Shabbatai a choice. Either you die or convert to Islam. So he converted. Now, there were about 1 million followers prior to the conversion. When the conversion happened, then there was disillusionment among the Jews. But there were some diehard people who set up different cults of Shabbatai Tzvi. And the worst one of them was called the Domeh, which was a secret organization. And the Domeh was based in Turkey and in Salonika. And the Domeh gave rise to these terrible orgies that went on, which became part of the immorality theology of Shabbatai Tzvi, corrupted later on. He apostatized himself 10 years before his death. So when he died in 1676, he had these cults doing all kinds of evil.
And the reason that these followers of Shabbatai Tzvi were doing evil was because what?
Here's the thing. The Talmud says that the Messiah would come when everybody's good or everybody's bad. There is such a saying in the Talmud. So the Sabbatians said like this: it's impossible for everybody to be good. It's easy to be bad. So they turned around the Torah and they said, if you do an evil deed, then you will use up the energy of the universe, and it'll collapse, and you'll force the Messiah to come because you will have used up all the evil in the world. So whenever they engage in an orgy, they would make a bracha, and every day they would figure out a way to do as many sins as possible. Like if you eat chaylev, you're chayav karet. In other words, if you eat fat, according to the Torah, you're to be excommunicated from your people. So they would eat fat that was prohibited, non-kosher fat, from a kosher animal, which is chaylev, which is in that category, like eating blood from a
So
kosher
they would
animal.
dafka do the opposite.
They do the opposite.
In order to hasten the
Coming of the Messiah. After Shabtai Tzvi died, one of the most powerful Sabbatean cults, as they were called, was a transformation of the Domeh, the most extreme cult, to Europe through an insidious person by the name of Jacob Frank. He died in 1791. Now, the Frankists started to spread and take over entire communities and make them satanic. And you can actually trace a line historically, which I do in my book, to the CFR from Shabtai Tzvi, and another organization called the Illuminati, which was founded in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt. And they were involved also in the French Revolution, which is also well documented.
So what you're saying is that there really does exist a new world order, that it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy.
Right, and Professor Katz wrote a book called The Jews and Freemasonry, which gives a history of the interface between Jews and some of the cults that derived out of Shabtai Tzvi. But the next big cult that came from Shabtai Tzvi after the Domeh organization, which was in Turkey, the next big cult were the Frankists, as I mentioned with Jacob Frank. So Jacob Frank, the Vad Arba Ratzah, the Council for Lands, wanted to deal with Frank, and they decided to have a big excommunication on the 20th of Sivan 250 years ago. And there, they made the following rulings. They said everybody that is a Frankist is to be excommunicated.
From the Jewish people?
From the Jewish people, bastards to the 10th generation, is what it said. And they prohibited people, because the Frankists were into Kabbalah, they prohibited the study of Kabbalah until you were 30 or 40 years old and you had a belly full, as they said, full of Talmud. Only then could you study the Kabbalah.
Right.
And they said their women are whores, and they're hereby excommunicated from our people to the 10th generation.
This is what the Council of Foreign Lands had labeled the Frankists, because they so deviated from Judaism and all that Judaism holds to be true and righteous. These people went off and made basically their own deformed religion, and so the Jews wanted nothing to do with them. They kicked them out.
That is correct.
Are there non-Jews that joined this Sabbatian cult?
No, non-Jews did not join the Sabbatian cult, but the non-Jews did join the Illuminati.
Frankist movement was a front organization for Illuminists, believing that one achieves purity through sin. Thus, we find Frankists practicing sex orgies. While such ideas were foreign to Orthodox Jews, they were not strange or alien to the predominantly Gentile Illuminist movement. As a matter of fact, in his writings, the Illuminist Adam Weishaupt called for the abolition of all ordered forms of religion, and that syncs up perfectly with what the Frankists were trying to achieve. The story of the Frankists begins really not with the founder of the movement, Jacob Frank, but with Sabbatai Zevi or Zivi, a claimed Messiah and Kabbalist.
And he was a Turkish fellow, is that right?
That's correct. Sabbatai Zivi founded the Donmi sect, a group which became rather large in the Ottoman Empire. And Sabbatai does not appear to have been insane. He knew what he was doing when he made this declaration of being
This was
Messiah.
in the 1600s, was it?
Yes, that's correct. The rationale put forward was that because Sabbatai was the Messiah, he had the authority to abolish the religious observances of traditional Judaism. And he began moving in this direction by declaring the 10th of Tevet no longer a day of fasting, but a day of feasting. Sabbatai claimed that he had been promised a consort in a dream, and that consort was to be an unchaste woman. And there was a woman that was living in Livorno named Sarah that became his choice pick. She was a prostitute who claimed that she was to become the bride of the Messiah. So she was brought to Cairo and married to Sabbatai and fell into the role quite nicely and helped to confirm his messiahship, at least in the eyes of his followers. This group taught Jacob Frank. We see that there is these heretical beliefs with Jacob Frank from his earliest days, that he was probably brought up in it from childhood on. So Jacob Frank began holding secret meetings in 1755, where he preached ideas that were antithetical to the Orthodox Judaism. One gathering in a place called Landskron was so egregious, it had just so much outrageous nonsense went on there, that it drew the attention of the authorities in the area, it drew the attention of the rabbis, and as a result, a rabbinical court was held in Satanov, a village, where many of Frank's followers confessed to all sorts of outrageous sexual immorality.
And we are networked, technically. That's how human interactions work. And so when you do something that you shouldn't do, it's worse than you think. And when you do something that you should do, it's better than you think.
When you do something you shouldn't do, it's worse than you think. When you do something you should do, it's way better than you think. Meaning, the repercussions, the wave, frequency, the energy wave that you put off is more powerful. It's a ripple, like a ripple in the water. When you drop a rock in the water and the ripples, the little waves, think about it like that. Because this is the truth. This is what I know before I even known Jordan Peterson. So when it comes to the things going on in our world today, you got to understand, people, one person knowing 5 people, one of those 5 people could have 1,000 people that they ripple, that they affect, and you could change so much stuff if people were willing to understand that and do some simple things besides the other things that they're doing that aren't creating good ripples or helping the rest of the world. Like, we all need each other, people. You gotta understand this. We are all fucking connected, whether you like it or not. It's the truth.
You're the center of a network. And you know way more people than this, but let's say typically, you're going to know 1,000 people in your life, well enough to have an impact on them. Okay? And each of those 1,000 people is going to know 1,000 people. So you're 1 step from 1,000,000 and 2 steps from 1,000,000,000. And we are networked, technically. That's how human interactions work. And so when you do something that you shouldn't do, it's worse than you think. And when you do something that you should do, it's better than you think. And so you think, well, this is why I've been telling people, well, clean up your room. It's like, well, your room is actually networked too. It's not that easy to clean up your room, to set it. So you want your room to be set up so that when you walk in there, it tells you to be better than you generally are. It's organized. It's got direction. Everything's in its place. You try to do that in a chaotic household. You know, I've watched people do this because I have students do these sorts of things as assignments. I'd say, look, pick a small moral goal, clean up your room, and just write down what happens as a consequence. So maybe these are students in a chaotic household. The whole place is a bloody mess. No one's taking any responsibility for anything. And so they decide they're going to start to clean up their room. And then the people in the household notice. Well, the first thing they do is get pissed off. It's like, who do you think you are? Like, you think you're better than us? Like, why do you think this is worthwhile? Who died and made you God? All of that. So just by trying to organize this little part of their life, they immediately run into...
That resonates with me so deeply, people don't even understand. You wouldn't be able to understand. When I think back of my own life and certain environments And certain things that I did without even knowing what I was doing, it was like a mechanism. And now I look back at it today and it's mind-blowing.
The people whose actions they're casting in a dim light by trying to improve themselves to some degree, they might have to have like a thorough war in their household to be allowed to do something as simple as keep the room orderly. They'll find out very rapidly that A, that's way more difficult than it sounds, and B, that the consequences of it are far more far-reaching than people think. So that's quite fun. You know, because maybe part of it is that like everything around you is full of potential. Everything. Maybe more potential than you could ever possibly utilize. And so maybe all you have is this little rat hole of a room in some rundown place in the world. It's like, fix it up. There's more there than you think. See what happens if you fix it up. And you'll fix yourself up simultaneously because you have to get disciplined in order to fix up the room. Then you have a fixed up room and you'll be a more fixed up person. It's like, you think that nothing will happen as a consequence of that? It's like all hell will break loose as a consequence of that. It's really worth trying.
It is worth trying, and it's a concept that seems alien to people. But if you think about it, it makes sense.
Well, people don't take what they have right in front of them seriously enough. It's like the wasting time thing. They don't do the arithmetic. You know, and they also don't understand. They devalue what they have right in front of them. Like another client I worked with was having a hard time putting his kid to bed at night. And so we did the arithmetic. It's like, well, I'm fighting with my kid for 45 minutes a night trying to get him to go to bed. Okay, so let's analyze that. All right, so what does that mean? Well, it means that both of you end the day upset. That's not so good, because why would you want that? It means that you're spending 45 minutes fighting when you could spend 20 minutes doing something positive, like reading to him, say. It means that you don't get to spend that time with your wife, so she's not very happy with you. Plus, you're annoyed because you don't see her. Plus, you blame it on the kid because he's the proximal cause. It's like, that's pretty damn ugly. And then let's do the arithmetic. It's like 7 days a week, 45 minutes a day. Let's call that 5 hours, 20 hours a week, 240 hours in a year. You're spending a month and a half of work weeks fighting with your 4-year-old son. You think you're going to like him? You don't like anyone you spend a month and a half a year fighting with. It's a bad idea. Fix it. It's important. Get him to bed. Make it peaceful. You do it like these things that repeat every single day. That's a motif in this book too. Your life isn't margaritas on a beach in Jamaica. That happens now and then. Those are exceptions. Your life is how your wife greets you at the door when you come home every day. Because that's like 10 minutes a day. Your life is how you treat each other over the breakfast table. Because that's an hour and a half or an hour every single day. You get those mundane things right, those things you do every day. You concentrate on them and you make them pristine. It's like you got 80% of your life put together. These little things that are right in front of us, they're not little. That's the first thing. They are not little, and they're hard to set right. And if you set them right, it has a rippling effect. And
Yes. Yes. And that's what we have lost in this country. You gotta listen to the beginning of this. Just listen.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Some happy little place where, you know, someone's feeding you peeled grapes. That isn't what it is. It's more like victory on the honorable battlefield or something like that.
Yeah, the perception that people have of ultimate success and ultimate happiness is, it seems motivated by what they don't have rather than an understanding of what success and happiness really is. Their idea is that one day I'm going to go and I'm going to be in my golden years and I'm just going to be able to sit around and do nothing and tell everybody to fuck off. You won't be happy at all.
I talked to one of the people that I was working with who had a vision for retirement. I said, well, what's your vision for retirement? Well, I see myself in the beach, you know, some tropical country drinking margaritas. And I thought, first, that's not a plan. That's a travel poster. It's like, okay, let's walk through this. All right, so you go down to this tropical country and you go sit on the beach and you have a margarita. It's like, okay, well, how many margaritas? Like 10? Okay, so you're going to do that, what, you're going to do that for 6 months?
You'll be dead.
Yeah, well, you'll be this, like, pathetic, sunburned, like...
Fat.
Yeah, unhappy, hungover, cirrhotic.
In pain.
Yeah, it's like, that's your vision.
Dehydrated.
So how long can you have a margarita on a beach? Like, maybe you can do that once every 6 months for, like, 10 minutes, something like that. It's not a vision.
It's true, but when you are working and slaving away, you think about that beach with your feet up, and the waiter comes over. Would you like another margarita, Mr. Peterson?
Yeah.
Yes, I would.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're like,
absolutely.
all right,
but
baby.
Right, exactly. But it's like this 16-year-old fantasy of paradise. It's like, well, and it just doesn't work out. So and the thing is that the thing that sustains people through life.
Glamour shots of Miss Cartagena don't count.
She has the girl.
And I say the girl's in Russia. Prove me wrong.
It's over, Tim. Close up. Get on the plane and come back home.
Bureaucracy is shit. This is why I operate black. Have a nice flight, Timoteo.
You were a cartel guy.
Yeah?
Kept your mouth shut, did your time. Could have picked up where you left off. Bought yourself a condo on the beach. Instead, you're doing this. Why?
Really? I had that condo on the beach. 15th floor, marble everything, overlooking the whole bay. First night out of jail, I slept in my own bed. Day 2, I was back in business. Same old life. But it doesn't feel right. Not the drugs, not the hookers. But damn it, if I didn't keep trying. So, one night, I'm leaving a bar all jacked up on coca, and I notice this young girl on the corner. Fine looking, maybe 20, 25. Take her up to my place, we do the deed, pay the bill. She's putting on her shoes, and I notice something. I notice her foot. She's got these little pink cat faces painted on her toenails. And it hit me. She's not 25. Then she glances up and her eyes connect. And it was like I was granted a glimpse into her soul. And all I saw was sadness. Out of nowhere, she starts talking. Turns out she's not 25, not even 20. This girl is 14 years old, Timoteo. She's been doing it since she was 6. Looks at me, smiles, takes the money, walks out the door. All of a sudden, I'm hit by this tidal wave, this tsunami of darkness. And I know I'm the sadness in her eyes. Me, I'm the darkness. And I know the darkness has to die. So I get my 45. Put it to my head. Put my finger on the trigger. Now, if there is a time to ask if God exists, that would be it. So I did. When God tells you what to do, you cannot hesitate.
An estimated 2 million children are trafficked every year, and we can help them. Sound of Freedom is based on a true story about real-life heroes saving kids from the dark world of child trafficking. We know this is heartbreaking and it hurts to look at, but the first step in helping these children is hearing their story. Not enough people know this problem exists, and even fewer people are willing to do anything about it. Our goal is to inspire 2 million people to attend the film's opening weekend, to represent the 2 million trafficked children around the world. To spread the word, Angel Studios set up a pay-it-forward program where you can pay for someone else's ticket who might not otherwise see it. If the ticket price is stopping you from attending, claim your free ticket at angel.com/freedom. Sound of Freedom opens the week of July 4th. Every parent, every adult, and every teenager in America should be there to see it. If millions of us come together today to see this film, we could propel the movement to help save millions of children around the world. And you can send the message that God's children are no longer for sale.
The entire simulated system is beginning to crumble because we are consciously and collectively choosing not to buy what they are selling. I'm not buying their deranged agenda, and I know you aren't either. Their evil and their deceit are no match for the light. The media can't push the lies anymore. Thousands of digital soldiers are digging up the facts within minutes and spreading the truth within hours. Narratives that would last weeks are destroyed in days. Make no mistake, a new world is not only possible, but she is already on her way. Your emotional intelligence and intuition will offend anyone who can't run game on you. Keep spreading that love, because we all know who wins in the end.
If you put 100 red ants and 100 black ants in a jar and shook it, they'll go to war never knowing who shook the jar.
Oh, hey. Consider yourself a patriot? Let's talk for a second. I'm tired of being lied to. I'm tired of being manipulated on every fundamental level. They want us to fight each other. They want it to be left versus right, Republican versus Democrat, liberal versus conservative. They want it that way because they know that a united populace is the greatest force on the planet. And they want to keep us broken apart and not realizing that so that we don't hold their feet to the candle as it is well overdue. Look, I believe that we have more alike than we have in differences. I believe that we want America to thrive, we want our families to thrive, we want opportunities, we want equality and justice and all of those great things that both of us preach all the time. We are the same. So, put your ism aside, put your side aside. Let's come to the table and let's talk to one another. I'm in if you're in.
And so it has been, with but minor variations in one country after another. Divide the people. Get them fighting among themselves rather than their common enemy. Create the appearance of popular support through a favorable press and the use of terror, intimidation, and the creation of martyrs. Make the world believe the revolution is a popular one. Neutralize the opposition. When obstructionists to the cause become too irritating, label them as fascist, Nazi, anti-Semitic, extremist, racist, controversial. Precipitate mob violence. Get the mobs into the streets. March and demonstrate. As the demonstrations grow in number and intensity, they will acquire political character through the desired collision and open combat with the forces of law and order.
I'm going to show you two instruments of tyranny. The first is a gun, a symbol of force, violence, and destruction. This is not the best instrument of tyranny. This is the type of thing used by tyrants who are stupid, clumsy, and desperate. When the masses are being controlled by this, they can clearly see they must destroy or escape whoever is pointing this at them. The smart tyrants use the other instrument of tyranny, paper. The paper on which is printed the auto registration you must show, the proof of insurance you must show, the tax form that you must file, the permit or license that you must pay for, the application you must fill out. Whether we realize it or not, we only submit to this because we are being threatened by this. What if we knew they did not have this? Would we do this? I wouldn't. When we do this, we are really reacting to this, tyranny. But just as a gun can be pointed in two directions, paper can be used by all parties. How can you use the power of paper? One way is something called an affidavit. An affidavit seems simple and harmless. It's simply a sworn statement of fact signed by a notary. But a lot more people have been robbed with this than with this. A properly executed affidavit is law until it is rebutted by another affidavit. Suppose you send your mortgage lender an affidavit that says you just discovered that the loan documents they asked you to sign have misrepresentations, lack of disclosure, or fraud. If you are wrong, you may go to jail for perjury. If you're right, you may get the deed to your house free and clear. An affidavit is a powerful thing. The author of an affidavit can take all the marbles. He can make the rules. In my affidavit, I can say, you hereby agree to pay me $50 a month unless you rebut this affidavit within 30 days. If you make the mistake of tossing that affidavit into your inbox and forgetting about it, 30 days later you are a slave to me. Under the law, $50 per month of your earnings belongs to me. That's the point of those cryptic notices from your credit card company. These are the new terms of your credit card. The law says that you agree and accept the presented terms unless you respond and refuse to accept. If you respond, you can change those rules all you want. All you have to do is respond. That notice they sent you is not enforcement of their rules. That is an opportunity for you to agree with their rules by remaining silent. Send a notice back saying, you may not charge me any late fees, and I will not pay more than 5% interest on my credit card charges, and those are the terms you must accept if you wish to have me as a credit card customer. If the credit card company does not rebut or cancel your card within your time limit, you are legally entitled to the terms you offer. Your announcements and demands are just as valid as theirs. If your notice is in the form of an affidavit, no judge, court, or officer may deny your claim, and the credit card company may not impose different terms unless you agree to them either by response or by silence. As odd as it seems, it's probably not a good idea to ever sign anything that you did not write yourself. If you write it, it benefits you. If they write it, it benefits them, and it probably costs you in a big way. An affidavit is not a complicated thing. Samples of them are easy to find. There's no particular layout that's required. Basically, it's a sworn statement of true and complete fact with a date and a notarized signature. If it affects another party, it must be presented to that party with a reasonable time for response. Large institutions are very good at sending notices, but they are not very good at reading and responding to notices they receive. That is not your problem. Institutional size and bureaucratic incompetence is not an excuse for anything. Send them the notice and hold them to the terms contained in that notice. If they refuse your terms, change the terms or walk away from the relationship. Just make sure that you always play by your rules, not theirs. That's what the Declaration of Independence is. Our rules, not theirs. Just as tyranny comes in many forms, revolutions come in many forms. We can have a nice, nonviolent revolution. We can even do it all through the mail if we borrow a trick that institutions use against us. If this is used more effectively, then nobody will have to use this.
To anybody out there still listening, this will be our last transmission. There comes a time in every man's life when he has to stop looking up to his heroes and become one himself. It doesn't matter who you voted for, or what kind of car you drive, or what the man on the news has to say. Just take a look around. This ain't the life we fought for. Our world is under siege. Our nation is in peril. And our people are divided. We've sacrificed too much for our freedom to let it slip away now. The world doesn't need more billionaires. The world doesn't need more politicians. The world needs heroes. And you don't need X-ray vision. You don't need to fly. You don't need to look cool on the cover of a comic book. You just need to realize what you're made of. And you are the few. You are the strong. You are the brave.